Sallie Krawcheck. Thank you for coming to 3050 and sitting down with Forbes.
No, happy to be here.
I want to start with some news.
Yes.
You seem nervous. Ellevest.
What news?
What news? Maybe it's news to you. No, Ellevest recently expanded an offering for its female investors, and it's a new product. Can you talk about this? Because I think it's really interesting.
Well, you know, I think the best kept secret about Ellevest are the types of investments that we're doing. And what we found is nobody doesn't love a 60-40 investment portfolio, but what really can generate excitement and financial returns are investments in other women and investments for impact. And so while we continue to do the 60-40 portfolio, we do it with a twist. In our muni bonds, for example, we can invest, you know, by neighborhood and in the community development center and not in the sports arena. You know, we also can invest in, workforce housing fixed up sustainably, rented to women in transition, women venture funds, all of those for women for whom those are appropriate investments. And the one that we recently announced was our clients funding the documentary of Michelle Wie as well. So really eclectic and interesting things that get people, I think, really excited about the concept of investing in a way that traditional investments did not.
Do you have to be an accredited investor?
You do for most of these because they tend to be private. We do have impact investing for our non-accredited investors as well. Tends to be through the form of an ETF.
Okay. What has been the philosophy in expanding to these types of investments? Because Ellevest did not start there, obviously.
No, we started as a digital advisor, really with the point of view that the investing industry was not really focused on or centering women. For example, when we launched and still today, our investing algorithm is the only one that takes gender into account, which matters if you're a woman and you earn less, take more career breaks, your salary peaks sooner, and you live longer, right? So that's really where we started. And then we got demand from other women who had more complex investment portfolios and said, I really want to be part of this as well. And our mission is to get more money in the hands of women. Our goal is to help women build wealth through investing and financial planning and financial guidance, and we're now doing that across the spectrum, from that first dollar through to women who have multiple tens of millions of dollars with us to really be there on her financial journey through her whole life.
So you're competing with the Fidelities and the Charles Schwabs of the world to get my money?
Yes and no. What we tend to be competing with mostly, particularly for younger women, is their money sitting in the bank or it's sitting in an old 401k at a job they left. And the force that we're fighting is inertia, which is, gee, you know, I don't notice that I'm losing out on wealth if I don't move it over to Ellevest today or tomorrow or the next day or whatever. But over the course of her lifetime, it can cost her hundreds of thousands, for some women, millions of dollars. For wealthier women, we tend to then, you know, be competing with more of the traditional advisors. And we really stand ready for her when she comes at a point of transition oftentimes, where she looks around and says, you know what, maybe my dad's financial advisor or my husband's financial advisor or my ex-husband's financial advisor doesn't represent me, you know, hasn't been through the things I've been through and isn't offering the types of investments that an Ellevest offers. And so we will often see at a point of transition that she'll say, you know what, this is really what I want now.
I think that's a common experience for women. I talked to Sheila Johnson yesterday, the co-founder of BET and Salamander Resorts and Collection, and she has this experience of having gone to the bank with a lot of money.
A lot of money.
Nine figures in that,
yes.
And was, you know, greeted with a lower level, I shouldn't say lower level, but a junior employee.
When I was running Merrill Lynch, we saw this all the time. At the time, I think still today, 85% of financial advisors are men. They would have the couple as a client, and then when we would do, you know, review them sort of behind the glass as they were engaging with the couple, we'd say, how much time did you spend talking to each of them? And they'd say, you know, it wasn't quite 50-50 because we talked about the football game, and so, you know, it was 55% talking to him, 45% talking to her, and we'd say, actually watch the tape, it's 80-20. And so Maggie, the industry today has pretty perfect product market fit. I'll try that again. The industry today has pretty Perfect product market fit. Say that 12
Pretty
times.
perfect product market fit.
It's hard to say.
It is hard to say.
For men.
Yes.
And men tend to leave at a very low rate, single-digit rate, until they pass away. When that money goes to her, because 80% of women die single, we live 6 to 8 years longer than men, half of marriages end in divorce. When she gets it, she leaves that joint financial advisor at a rate of 70 to 90% over the next year. What? And typically puts it in the bank. Wow. So perfect product market for him, not good product market fit for her. And the industry has always sort of had a narrative around this, which is, well, she's risk averse. She needs more financial education. She doesn't like investing. Just these, this is her, not us. And Ellevest was the first that said, you know what? Let's build something centering her as opposed to trying to get her to change.
That's smart. And so that's an opportunity for you, and that's why you have 1.9 billion in AUM.
We're chugging along.
Even through, I know savings rates kind of took a dip last year and the year before as inflation has surged. So how's that affecting your business?
Well, yeah, I'm sure it has, but we grew at a 40% rate last year with our marketing spending down 40%.
Wow.
And so we are really seeing some market share gains.
So would you say Ellevest consumers are the ones who are a little more, do they have more knowledge, or they're risk happy? I shouldn't say risk happy, because it's not risky to invest.
No, but what over the long term, it has historically not been risky to invest. Over the short term, which is what people tend to track towards, it can of course be risky to invest in the stock market, but again, over the long term, it hasn't. What we did have seen, which is meaningful, is that in tough markets, which we've had over the past couple of years, women are less likely, indeed much less likely, to panic than men are. And so the men log into their accounts more often when you do and the market is volatile. It makes you want to do something. And that something is often not the right thing to do. We find that we set her a plan and she sticks to that plan. And so we've always known, the research has shown, that women tend to be steadier hands with investing and therefore get better financial results. It's research based, not my opinion. And we're actually seeing it come to life at Ellevest.
We need to shout that from Wall Street's rooftops, don't we? Now, you just talked about the longevity of women and the wealth transfer. Yes. And Ellevest has new research that you initiated, and you were calling it the great wealth transfer, or the feminization of wealth.
That's right.
Can you break that down? What does that mean?
So baby boomers have amassed more wealth than any generation in history. They're very fortunate. Markets tended to go up, real estate prices went up. It's a pretty good environment. Baby boomers, the first of them, are approaching the age of 80, and so are beginning to pass away. This will set in motion the great wealth transfer. A lot of people talk about it and say, what does it mean for millennials? What does it mean for Gen Z? At Ellevest, we look at it and say, what does it mean for women? It means that the money will go to them first. Again, women, 80% of women die single. 90% of women manage their money on their own at some point in their lives. It goes to them first before it goes to the kids, which means that women will control the majority of the wealth in this country over the next, call it 10 years. So, in fact, it's all of the feminist movements, women's longevity is going to achieve what they haven't been able to achieve. So what does it mean? According to the research we did, the feminization of wealth means confident women. Confident. We've always thought women don't have confidence around money, and so therefore they don't have as much money. In fact, what the research shows is women have not had as much money, so they've lacked confidence. Once they get a financial windfall, those who had it, their confidence goes up by about double and makes them, in fact, more confident than men. So what does a confident woman do? A confident woman gives $1 billion to the Albert Einstein School of Medicine in the Bronx to wipe out tuition in perpetuity. That's what a confident woman does. She invests more in her family, she invests more in her community, she gives more to nonprofits, she fights climate change. The feminization of wealth, she might leave her spouse or a partner. We've seen, particularly for younger women, they say, if I were to get a financial windfall, I'm out of here because I can afford to be. Yeah. And so confident women may take confident action, which I can't wait to see how it affects all of us.
So many follow-up questions, but when you talk about the application of the feminization of wealth, I think about politics in the U.S. And you hosted an event for All Raise at your apartment a few months ago. Not a few months, almost a year ago now. My sense of time is a little warped. But you and the other women, and All Raise, of course, is the nonprofit trying to get more check writers who are women giving money to startups run by women. And you and the other women in the room talked about how our political system could change if more women had more money. We're in an election year, so can you talk about the ties between women and wealth and power?
Absolutely. So women today have about 30 cents of wealth to every dollar a white man has. For women of color, for black women, it's a penny. And by the way, it's been moving in the wrong direction. Women today give about 30 cents of political donations to every dollar men give. And so you can imagine as the wealth grows, she gives greater political donations to candidates who support her point of view. In that world, have we struck down Roe v. Wade, right? In that world, is there more legislation that's being passed for women and girls? Do we have mandated paid parental leave finally, right? How do politics become kinder? You know, if we have more politicians who are representing our points of view, do we have as many wars? I mean, you can see where there could be a truly positive ripple effect from this as women really step into their wealth.
I like imagining those ripple effects.
I know. It's just a question of how far we've gone and how long it's going to take us to pull that back.
Do you have a speculation?
No, I don't.
No crystal ball.
I don't.
I want to zoom out and maybe less speculation and talk about your current and your future. So you recently joined a board, and you told me that you try to only do one board at once. So before we talk about the board, why is that your philosophy? And was there a time you were on multiple boards and it was overwhelming?
When I was in corporate America, I remember at one point I was on the Dell board and I think the BlackRock board. But I've gone to one board only, in part because I'm so consumed with Ellevest and the work that we're doing. And so every additional hour that I've got, I want to spend either with my family or on the business, maybe my cat, you know, a little bit of time with her, because it's such a high return on my time and the work we're doing is so important. That said, I think as an executive, it's always important to keep yourself fresh. And so as I've thought about a board, what is it that I can bring to them that can help their business? What is it they can bring to me? And what is it that I can be learning at any point in my career? So, you know, back when I was thinking about starting Ellevest, I went on a startup board. You know, when I was thinking about scaling Ellevest, a growth board. And so sort of having this series of boards to bring in the additional, you know, quick learning really matters to me, which is why I joined the board of BioCatch. You know, security is, in fintech, you know, one of the most, you know, I think Ellevest is the most important thing I could work on, but security for, you know, for banks, for financial services companies, the lifeblood of our economy, and helping them keep the customer and client data safe is pretty important.
Oh, absolutely. We had Michelle Zatlin, the co-founder of Cloudflare, here yesterday talking about how by 2025 there will be $10.5 trillion of cybercrime in you know, lost money from cybercrime. So it is probably, is it the biggest existential threat to fintech businesses?
It's a pretty big threat, you know, and it ripples, of course, because if you have those losses, you know, lose consumer confidence. Financial services are the lifeblood of the economy. So if you've got a lack of confidence, you know, we all know what happens, which is the economy contracts. Confidence.
It's funny how that keeps coming up. Personal confidence and then economic confidence. How do you keep your confidence intact?
Put the blinders on, eyes on the prize. We were talking on that panel earlier. You really, it's important as an entrepreneur to stay focused on what's important and really let the other things go. I remember Masters of Scale, one of the things Reid Hoffman talked about is there's some fires you have to let burn. And I will tell my team, I know this is a problem, but that fire is going to burn. You know, I know we're not as good at X or Y as we want to be, or this department isn't working as well as we wanted to. We can't fight every fire. Just stay really focused in on the key things, both professionally and personally.
Can't fight every fire. Oh, I needed to hear that right now.
Yeah, there's some you just have to say, let it burn.
Let it firm. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about, and I know this is more leadership-y than in-depth investment, which we could probably talk about investment and SPVs and building a fintech company till we're blue in the face, but when I was talking to you about your leadership thesis or strategy, you talked about being irreproachable on your analytics and your numbers. Can you talk about how you came to that as a strategy?
Well, I've been around for a bit, and certainly in those early years, as I began to get the first, second, third promotion, I was the only woman in the room. And I thought very hard about what it was going to take for me to get the fifth, sixth, and seventh promotion. And the power in financial services is the numbers. And if you know the numbers and you have the numbers and you're responsible for the numbers, it doesn't matter how internalized the sexism or the misogyny or the anti-Southernism or the anti-bottle blondism is or whatever, they've got to come to you. And if you are then the source of the knowledge and the source of truth and you're engaging with people, then that starts to form the relationship. And instead of becoming that brassy, aggressive woman who's taking the job I wanted my son to have, you become a real person. And so I found knowing the numbers on Wall Street, that is the center of power, that's where to be. And then you and I also talked about having a certain, not fighting every last battle. If you look for sexism and you look for unfairness, you will find it everywhere. And is this small to medium-sized battle the one you want to fight? Or do you want to hold your fire for a more significant battle? And so letting some things just roll off your back, and finally bringing a sense of humor to it. I'm not a naturally funny person. I'm not even that funny anyway. But having a laugh with people, if they're laughing with you, they're not angry with you. And so using that as a little defense mechanism as well, and again to form relationships, was pretty effective for me.
It's also disarming. And last year on the 30/50 stage, Gloria Steinem said we need more laughter because that's the only emotion that can't be compelled or forced or manipulated.
She's so good.
She's so good.
Everything she says is so smart. She's so good. How about my favorite Gloria Steinem is we won't solve the masculinity, we will not solve the masculinity of power until we solve the feminization of wealth.
I like that.
Right? And, in a capitalist society, my putting it not as eloquently as she did, if women don't have as much money as men do, women won't be equal with men. And until the money is equalized, only then is the power equalized.
It's so
true.
So true. Mm-hmm. Sallie Krawcheck, you have been the CEO of Wall Street Banks. You have founded companies. You have raised venture funding. You are out there ringing the bell for the feminization of wealth. And you are an icon and a mentor to a lot of people. But do you feel pressure or the weight of being a mentor? And do you wish other people, other leaders, of any gender would step up?
I do. I think it's truly important that each of us do what we can for the next generation. And I do it not only in the let me mentor you, young lady, but through the work at Ellevest. That if we can help get more money to women, that's the greatest mentoring there is. And so in everything we're doing, and this isn't by, happenstance. I put in real thought into what the next phase of my career would be. And this is where I thought I can take the experiences that I've been fortunate enough and hardworking enough and stubborn enough to have and channel them into something that can actually make a demonstrable difference in individual women's lives. And, I was a couple weeks ago at the airport, had an Ellevest bag, and a young woman stopped me and said, do you work at Ellevest? Are you an Ellevest client? And I said, oh, I'm the CEO. And she said, you've got to thank the team, because I invested with you several years ago. I just took out the money to go to graduate school. Chills.
I just got them
chills, right? Chills.
Yeah. It shows you what money can do.
Absolutely.
Well, Sallie, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Think of a typical billionaire, and it's likely to be someone who falls into one of two camps: founders or co-founders, like Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg and Amazon chairman Jeff Bezos, or heirs like Jacqueline Mars, granddaughter of the founder of candy company Mars. A third category is the rarest, those who are neither founders nor heirs. Call them hired hand billionaires. or corporate ladder billionaires. Forbes has found just 26 people who were hired as executives, sometimes as junior employees, sometimes as CEOs, who became billionaires. Here are the top 5 richest hired hand billionaires in the US. Number 5, Jonathan Gray. Gray was hired at Blackstone in 1992, fresh out of college, and was named the firm's president and CEO in 2018. Gray and his wife Mindy established the Bazar Center for BRCA at the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine, focused on the prevention and treatment of certain genetically caused cancers. Number 4, Charles Simonyi. Early Microsoft employee Charles Simonyi is the man behind some of the company's most successful software, including Word and Excel. The developer has a PhD in computer science from Stanford and worked on one of the first personal computers at Xerox. He joined Microsoft, then a fledgling firm, as employee number 40 in 1981, and spent 2 decades in application and development. A native of Hungary, he left Microsoft in 2002 and founded Intentional Software, which develops platforms for productivity apps. Microsoft acquired Intentional Software in April 2017 for an undisclosed price, bringing Simonyi back to the Redmond, Washington giant. He supports arts and science initiatives, including a $5 million gift to the University of Washington for a computer science building in 2017. Number 3, Ramzi Musallam. Private equity billionaire Ramzi Musallam turned tragedy into a Forbes 400 fortune. Musallam joined private equity firm Veritas in 1997 and was their second highest ranking executive. After his boss and the firm's founder died by suicide in 2012, Musallam persuaded the investors to stick with the firm, which he then took over leading as CEO to great success. Number 2, Eric Schmidt. Schmidt was Google's CEO from 2001 to 2011, and its executive chairman from 2011 to 2015. Prior to that, he had stints as CEO of Novell and Chief Technology Officer at Sun Microsystems. He co-founded Innovation Endeavors, a venture capital firm that has invested in Uber, SoFi, Zymergen, and others. He has toured some of the world's most tightly controlled regimes to promote open internet access, including in Cuba and North Korea. More recently, Schmidt has been quietly plotting a new defense tech effort, a stealth military drone project, 4 sources with knowledge of the effort told Forbes. Number 1, Steve Ballmer. Steve Ballmer is the high-wattage former CEO of Microsoft, who led the company from 2000 to 2014. He joined Microsoft in 1980 as employee number 30, after dropping out of Stanford's MBA program. Ballmer ran Microsoft as CEO after the first dot-com crash and through efforts to catch up to Google in search capabilities and Apple in mobile phones. In 2014, the year he retired from Microsoft, he bought the NBA's Los Angeles Clippers for $2 billion. Forbes estimates that the team is now worth $4.65 billion. He has ramped up his philanthropy since 2014, putting over $2 billion into a donor-advised fund, with a focus on economic mobility. To date, the Ballmers have given away more than $3.5 billion. Ballmer is building a privately funded $2 billion arena in Inglewood, California. The Intuit Dome, expected to be ready this year, is rising across the street from the $5 billion SoFi Stadium, the 70,000-seat home of the city's 2 NFL teams, and Hollywood Park Casino.
Miriam Rivera, you are the co-founder and managing director of Ulu Ventures, an early-stage investment firm. You are one of the faces of this year's 50 over 50 investment list. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I was asking you before we started rolling what your greatest over 50 accomplishment is, and you say it's the company that you're running now. Tell us about it.
Ulu Ventures is a seed stage venture capital firm located in Palo Alto, California. We started fundraising from outside investors after I turned 50.
So why is it your greatest over 50 accomplishment?
Because it's really allowed me to give other people opportunities that have just been extraordinary for myself, and that I wanted to give back to younger people, diverse people. It's been a fabulous way to do that.
Now you frame it as giving back, but you are looking for profits, you are looking for returns, and in fact, in your portfolio, there are 10 unicorns, which is not the greatest number compared to Sequoia, but that's a pretty large number for a firm of your size. How did you do that?
We did that by identifying talented people who were really trying to pursue really big markets, and also many of them want to do something that supports a positive social end, and we think that there's just great opportunities for them. We also looked particularly for teams that had diverse members, because there's a lot of data that showed in public companies, diverse board members could actually generate greater profitability. And that's what has turned out over the last 15 years to also be true of startup companies.
They perform better when teams look more like America.
That's right.
So aside from looking for diverse teams, strong teams, good management structures, what is your investment thesis? What are the sector-based trends that you're looking for these days?
So in enterprise software, we look for technologies that help make business more efficient and profitable. We looked for other kinds of businesses, such as in the healthcare well-being space, sustainability, financial services, innovation, basically new ways of doing business.
New ways of doing business. And those new ways of doing business have created 10 unicorns, and of those unicorns, 5 are run by women, I
understand? 5 had a woman founder at the start, and actually all of them still have a woman founder. 2 of them have women CEOs.
We're speaking in a moment where DE&I has been under attack in America. The litigiously minded folks in this country, some of them say, focusing on women and people of color is actually reverse discrimination, and you're leaving out white men. How do you respond to that, and how do you operate in this environment when you have other funds with similar focuses that have been sued?
Well, a lot of times people think diversity means minority only. That's not what we mean by diversity. Our teams have all permutations of people, all colors, all genders. There are plenty of white men in our portfolio. The other thing I would say is that really DEI is about having the customer in mind. When you think about growing a business, the main thing that you should be looking for is a large market. 70% of Americans are diverse people, meaning they are not white men. They are women, they are people of color, they are immigrant Americans. And they have different business needs perhaps than others. They're also going to be the majority of the working population in the United States by 2030. So we really need to emphasize how technology needs to adapt for Americans today.
Now, I know you have said that Silicon Valley looks like 1950s America. What do you mean by that?
Well, it would mean things like women-led companies only have about 2% of venture capital dollars, but obviously women represent over 50% of the population. They also represent over 60% of the educated population in the United States. That's an example of how extreme the change is needed in terms of trying to increase representation in business. And it's not going to happen with people who are opposed to investing in the most educated and the best.
And when you describe the business opportunity that you're seeing among the consumer market that's growing, would you say that the majority of Silicon Valley is missing out on a substantial amount of dollars?
Yes, I would say that in part because one of our clients, who is a very large pension, has a number of firms in Silicon Valley in their portfolio. And when they looked at who they had access to at seed stage, they had 0 of our entrepreneurs. All of these diverse entrepreneurs that represent, I said 50% of them have a woman on the team, 20% of them have a Latinx on the team, which is much more correlated with the Latinx population in the United States. About 45% of them have an immigrant founder. So we really have a diversity of team members, but 90% of those companies also have white people and white men on the team.
I've heard other venture capitalists say that investing is an art and a science. And I've heard you kind of talk about using your intuition as you're assessing companies, but also putting data to that intuition. Can you tell us how you do that? Because you have a really interesting model.
Yeah, we use a process called decision analysis that was developed at Stanford University by Professor Ron Howard. He helped us to develop a methodology where we actually use both intuition and data. So for example, we want to look at team risk, financing risk, market adoption risk, and product development risk. Every venture capitalist looks at those. What we do that's a little bit different is that we actually develop criteria around each one at every stage in the life cycle of a company, and we put a number to the level of risk. What that allows us to do is learn, because in a couple of years when our companies are looking to raise capital, we'll see whether or not they had one of those risks actually materialize. We'll also see, let's say we had 10 companies and we said 6 of them were going to be successful and only 2 are. We would learn that we're not calibrated appropriate to the level of risk, and we'd be able to get a sign of where the risk was higher than we anticipated.
And so do you track, so let's say you're looking at company named ABC and you say the management risk is 60%, and then let's say no negative event happens and it's a successful company, they have an exit, they have an IPO, they have something great happen 5-10 years down the line. Do you then adjust your model and how you assign the numbers and the scores in your model?
What we would do to learn from that, and we've actually done this recently, we look back at what the distribution of returns is that we expected for the portfolio. We've developed our models for each company in exactly the same way so that we can generate a distribution. One of the things that we know about early stage returns is that they are power law distributed. They are not normally distributed. So, for example, we expect most of the companies not to generate very interesting returns, but we expect a few of those companies to generate a great deal of return. And what will tend to happen is that really it's only the companies that get to the top of the market in terms of adoption that will actually generate most of the return. What we see is that's probably somewhere between about 10% of the companies. And what we've learned over time is that both our first and second portfolios are actually positively correlated with that notion that the top 10% are generating most of the return, and that we have a large portfolio enough to generate that return consistently.
That's really interesting. You have a data-driven approach, but you also have an approach that I think, if I'm correct in understanding your life journey, has been kind of informed by that journey. You are the daughter of migrant workers and really watched your parents build a life from scratch. Can you talk about your childhood and what you bring from that childhood to your work today?
Yes, my parents started off as migrant farm workers. They moved from Puerto Rico to Florida. Then they would work the crops between Florida and New York State. I was born in upstate New York in Dunkirk, New York. And they stopped doing that when my older sister got ready for school because they wanted her to be able to stay in one school district. So we moved to Chicago, and they were able to find factory work through, each of them had a sibling that had moved to Chicago from Puerto Rico. So that's where I grew up. My parents both obviously worked very hard. A lot of the times, lawyers have the worst hours of anyone. I would say, in fact, they say that they're even worse than doctors these days. And my sense of that is nobody really works as hard as a migrant farm worker. So I knew that I was really blessed to be able to do the kind of work that I have done, both as an attorney and as a venture capitalist.
You got to the attorney part before I did. You have 4 degrees from Stanford, is that correct?
I do. I love the place.
You were on their board for a minute there too, right?
Yeah, and we kind of say I bleed cardinal because that's the name of our team.
But speaking of the law, let's talk about your early days. So you get your law degree, you're working as a lawyer. You were hired as Google's second ever lawyer in 2001. That was early days for Google. What was that job like?
It was a really fun job. I have to say it's one of the more fun jobs I've ever had. And part of it is growing a company from what was $85 million the first year that I was there to over $10 billion in 5 years is an incredible opportunity. It's really like climbing Mount Everest with some of the smartest people you could ever meet. Also fun because it was a real startup. Like when I joined, they would actually make the rack servers for the data rooms in the hallways. And so I'd be walking over guys with rack servers, and people that in the data rooms would actually be wearing roller skates to actually change out parts on those servers. So it was a really fun time to work there.
It's gotten a little bit bigger in the years since.
A lot bigger. I think it was $10 billion when I left. I think they closed a $100 billion quarter last time.
And then before you founded your venture firm, you were also an entrepreneur. Tell us about those days.
Yeah, I was an entrepreneur in the late 90s, along with half of Silicon Valley, which was the first boom. And this was a real time when the internet was still new. I had worked on an IPO as a young attorney that had only 39 million users on the internet in 1996. So we were early days developing software that would be used by enterprises. And there were many times when we had to go without pay, where we really would do every kind of work that was needed to get it done. So I would work as the attorney, a consultant, and also hire people, negotiate leases, whatever needed to be done.
So then the evolution to venture founder, it really seems quite natural, because I think to go from law to venture feels like quite a jump. But does the JD inform what you do as a VC?
Yes, both the law and business school degrees really inform a lot of what I do. One, as a venture capitalist, you're basically selling securities. And I was a securities attorney, mostly working with venture capitalists and startup companies in the mid-90s before becoming a startup founder. And as a startup founder, you have to do everything that walks in the door. And part of what you're trying to do is build a business, but also keep your IP from bigger companies. So we were a small startup company, but we were dealing with Fortune 2000 company customers, and they have huge legal teams. So it was really helpful to have that background.
You have witnessed the evolution of the internet basically from its birth to today. And you invest in internet and tech-enabled businesses. So I'm really curious. You hear a lot of consumer concern about internet security, AI, social media. I could go on. But as you think about what everyday people are talking about and worrying about when it comes to the internet, what is a fear that you think is overblown?
I think a fear that's overblown is that AI will put people out of work tomorrow. Instead, I actually think that AI will help create more efficient ways for people to work and get rid of a lot of the drudgery of what they do. I also think that it will help them to be able to do more interesting parts of the job. So for myself, for example, if I were doing a bunch of document review for filing, let's say, I would have to go read everything, summarize it for myself, try to keep track of where it all is. I think AI can do that more effectively and at least guide me to places where you need a human and human judgment to be able to find the things that matter. So I think it's actually a great tool, and I think people are afraid when a lot of jobs really won't be replaced by AI, but I think they'll be augmented.
It's true. I think about transcription services. I remember when I was starting as a reporter, very meticulously sitting at a desk with my recorder here and my laptop here and transcribing every word. And I think my rate of typing was slow, so it would take like 8 hours to transcribe one interview. Yes. And I've gotten all that time back thanks to the AI services that just do it for me.
Yeah.
Are you looking for AI opportunities in your portfolio and in the startups you speak with?
We are, although we're tending to look at applications of AI as opposed to infrastructural AI. A lot of the big companies like Google and Microsoft and Apple are all developing AIs, obviously OpenAI as well, that are incredibly powerful, and they're spending tens of billions of dollars to do so. Competing head-on with those is maybe something that Elon can do, but it's probably not in my wheelhouse. So instead, we're looking for applications where our companies can help make businesses work cheaper, better, faster, and also serve new customers. For example, a company that is in our portfolio has applied AI to transcribing phone interviews that not-for-profits do with senior citizens that receive services from those not-for-profits. A lot of the times there's a government agency that's charged with making sure that seniors who don't have families are actually cared for. And the hardest thing they have to do is actually track down what's happening with a particular senior. Now, all of these records, like you, it takes a lot of time to transcribe all of the phone messages that you've gone through with respect to a client. So now an AI can help do that for the not-for-profit worker and get that into the system so people know, Beth's food was late or not delivered, and she can get the services that she needs.
Oh, that's really interesting. Now, I talked to you about people's fears. Flip side of that question, because you're looking at internet trends, technology trends, what is something that you're seeing percolating that is exciting that the consumer public is not talking about or realizing?
I think related to AI is the fact that we can develop software that's much more cost effective for areas that really don't have the same kind of budgets as the private sector. So we're seeing industries that are referred to as laggard industries like education or government, not-for-profits, be able to afford software that really meets needs that they have but might not have been able to afford before. For example, one of our portfolio companies is developing a technology to help not-for-profits be able to fundraise. And that's something that can be done with an AI more effectively, perhaps, than with other methods.
Miriam, we are speaking today in New York City and not Silicon Valley because you are in town for a board meeting. And I love this board. Can you tell us?
I'm here for the Sesame Street board meeting. It's actually called Sesame Workshop, but everybody knows it as Sesame Street.
How did you get on the board of Sesame Street? I will call it Sesame Street because I grew up watching Sesame Street.
It is a funny story in that they asked a number of diverse women if they would like to be on the board, expecting maybe one person to say yes, but instead they ended up with about 5 of us on the board. And all of us, because we had our own unique Sesame story.
What's your Sesame story?
As I mentioned, I was a Head Start kid. I spoke Spanish first. I didn't learn English until I was in Head Start, and Sesame Street was really one of the ways that my parents helped me learn English and get ready for school.
You have a really interesting statement that you've made, which is, I doubted there were many Googlers whose early childhood education consisted of Sesame Street and Title I Head Start, who had earned 4 Stanford degrees, co-founded a venture-backed startup, and would develop technology services agreements that would generate billions of dollars for Google. The long shot can be very profitable. You say that about yourself. Is that what you look for in entrepreneurs, the long shots?
I'm really looking for those long shots because in a power law distributed world, you're looking for long shots. It's really the few that will generate a lot of profitability.
How are you finding them?
It's looking for talent in places that others don't look. So, for example, we really look at diverse teams that include women, that include people of color, that include people of all genders, immigrants, for example. And there are huge markets in problems that people don't identify in venture capital as being huge. For example, one of our companies also uses AI and computer vision to create hair lace that is used to custom make wigs. This is a market that is addressing the needs of a large number of women, predominantly Black women, but also women with hair loss from disease. And they had the experience that even though they were this super dynamic team of 2 sisters, Nigerian immigrant Black women, one of them had a BS in computer science, a master's in electrical engineering, both from Stanford, a PhD in computer vision from MIT. Her sister had a Wharton undergrad and MBA, and they could not get a meeting in the East Coast to address this market because people think it's not a big market. When we analyze the data, it turns out that this is about a $12 billion market. We think that it can be kind of the Warby Parker of wigs.
That sounds like a huge business, but you have your eyes open, at least, so someone's funding them.
We're funding them, but we were the first venture firm that took a meeting with this team.
How many times in your career have you been the first or the only? Have you lost count?
I think I've lost count, and I don't want to. And my firm is trying to do something about that as well. I have a partner named Maria Salamanca, who's obviously also Latinx, and we also have a young senior associate, Andrea Bogarin, who is Peruvian also.
We talked a little earlier about your comment about Silicon Valley looking like 1950s America. Do you think it is changing?
It is changing. Over the last 15 years, the number of firms that have been started by people of color has really exploded. In 2020, we did an analysis of the market and determined that about 50 firms that were led by Black and Latinx founders had actually made about 2/3 of all the investments in African American and Latinx founders in the United States, and that would number fewer than 100 investments. So since that time, there's probably about 6 times as many firms.
Wow, so it's growing.
It's growing, and we have dynamics where right now venture capital is out of favor, and year-over-year investment in firms has gone down by 70%.
Venture capital is out of favor, or is it just that we had the frothiness of 2021 and the exuberance of so much investment that everyone's being a little more conservative with dry powder these days?
I think it's both. So one, we did have a lot of exuberance, but two, we also have a lot of safe yield coming in from government debt and treasury bills, for example. If you can get a guaranteed 5% rate of return that's backed by the US government, I think that's a pretty good investment for a lot of people.
I think that makes sense. As you look at your career, we ask everyone on the 50 over 50 this. When you were in your 20s and 30s, did you ever imagine your career over 50?
I had to admit that I hadn't thought about being 50 ever. I think that was beyond the point when I could think. When I was a kid, I really thought of setting goals for myself. And most of them I've met. And the last one that I did meet at 50 was actually running my first marathon. And I haven't written my book yet. That's another thing that I want to do at some point, is write a book.
So as a teen, you made a list of goals, and on it was run a marathon, which you've done, write a book.
Write a book. I thought I would get married. I wanted to go to graduate school. I wanted to raise children. So those were on my, I knew I wanted those things, but I didn't really know what would come after that point.
Is being over 50 an advantage or disadvantage in your line of work?
Well, some would say that it's a disadvantage. When I first started to raise capital for Ulu Ventures, I asked an experienced venture capitalist for a referral to a limited partner, which is an investor who invests professionally in venture firms. And he told me that venture was a young man's game. And so I was really left astounded because I'd served on a board with this person. I think he knew me fairly well, but he dismissed me out of hand.
And that's not the first time you've been dismissed. Earlier in your career, when you were a co-founder of a venture-backed company, you were a new mom, and one of your investors was a little opinionated about how you should be spending your time. Are you willing to share this story with us?
Yes, I think it's a mark of its day, but I had my daughter on Friday. I went back to work on Monday, and a few months later, I was told that by a director, if it were his grandchild, he'd prefer the mother to stay home. And I was asked to leave my firm.
You were asked to leave.
And that's partly because a new set of venture capitalists were coming in, and they did not want a husband and wife team. My husband and I were co-founders at the time of the startup. I certainly felt that it was a bias against working women, and certainly marital status bias.
So what I'm hearing is, as hard as that moment was for you when that investor said that awfully biased thing, you heard in that you were not wanted, and you would be better off finding somewhere that you would be valued and you would be accepted.
That turned out to be the case for me. I ended up at Google, which turned out to be a pretty good place to work and at a pretty good time. I think it's really important for people to identify a place where they'll really be given a fair shot and to find the right investors and the right supporters. If you don't do that, I don't think you can build a great career.
As I look at your career, it feels very intentional at every step. You have the degree, you become a lawyer, you work for Google, you take that knowledge and you eventually become a venture capitalist, and combining all of the above.
over the years, there were some moments of uncertainty. Is there a moment of uncertainty that stands out, either a decade or a job or one incident that you think back to and you at the time had no idea how it would work out?
I have to say that Google was partly like that. We were growing at the fastest rate of any company in American history, and I was literally the second person in this department, and we were overwhelmed by the volume of work on our team. At the first few weeks, I opened 130 different legal matters, and I really didn't think I could prepare folders anymore because it was just too much volume. So part of my challenge and a fun problem to solve was, how do we handle that much volume? And so a lot of the work that I did was actually re-engineering processes compared to just doing legal work. I ended up shortening our contract from 8 pages down to 1 page, for example, because the fewer words there are on a page, the fewer things there are to negotiate. Then I tried other approaches from even fast food operations to try to figure out, how do we get the volume through so that we don't slow down the revenue growth of this company. So a lot of my challenges were operational as opposed to legal in nature.
Well, I was going in that direction about uncertainty because I think so many people feel uncertain at different moments in their career. So taking that example, what did you learn about navigating through career uncertainty while you were at Google, navigating that deluge of business?
One is, I learned that I'm a pretty good surfer and that I think you have to have that mentality. I'm not a surfer, really. I do have a child who does it. But it's really understanding that you are riding a wave, that you are in hypergrowth, and that a lot of things will kind of fall to the wayside. One person said, should I give away my cat and my plants? Because it was not a time when you could have balance in life. So I think part of it is just realizing that there are moments in your life when all you'll do is just try to keep up. And if you can do more than that, it's gravy.
If we speak again in a year, 2 years, 5 years from now, what do you want to be able to tell me that you've accomplished or that Ulu has accomplished?
The best thing that we could do in the next 3-5 years would be to actually return capital and more to our investors. They are foundations, pensions, higher education endowments. They're all doing amazing things in their communities, providing scholarships, research that makes us all better off. They're providing for pensioners in their old age. We really want these companies to win so that those investors can win.
The American obsession with fast food dates back to the 1940s and 50s, and more recently we've seen the rise of an affordable yet elevated class of fast food. Riding the momentum of this wave is Peter Cancro, the owner of Jersey Mike's, who has run the subchain for nearly 50 years.
You know, oftentimes people say, what would you do differently, in your life if what you knew now you knew then? And I say, nothing. I'm not going to do anything different.
Cancro has grown Jersey Mike's into one of the nation's fastest growing fast food brands, on track to hit nearly $4 billion in system-wide revenue this year from 3,000 locations. And the Jersey-born native himself is worth an estimated $5.6 billion as the business's sole owner.
When I travel out around the country to see the stores, I don't have the tie on, but I have an Oxford blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up always, and jump behind the counter, sprinkle, wrap, slice, make the hot subs, banter with the customers and the employees. They're not allowed to introduce who I am, and of course I'm still the fastest slicer.
Jersey Mike's sells itself as being the only chain with slice-to-order fresh grilled sandwiches. It actually started out as a small sub shop in Point Pleasant, New Jersey, originally called Mike's Subs, where Cancro worked making sandwiches from the time he was 14 years old.
The Jersey Shore growing up here in Point Pleasant, what a place to grow up. Small town, everybody kind of knew your name. Summertime, of course, gets extremely busy, but that's how all the business happened. That's how a small little Jersey Mike's sub shop thrived from the summertime business. The business went up for sale when I was a senior in high school, and not for a second did I ever think about buying the business. And then one night, my mother said, "Peter, I heard it was for sale." She looked at me and said, "Well, why don't you buy it?" And I sort of laughed and went upstairs, and that's when the light bulb went off. And the next morning, got up, went out to try and raise the capital. Called up my youth football coach, Rod Smith, who was a banker, and he said, "I think that we can do something," and he did. So we purchased a store for $125,000, which today's dollars is about $750,000. And he always said, "Why did you lend so much money to such a young kid?" And no lie, he said, "I knew Peter could get the ball across the goal line." It was something that I really wanted to do, and gave up the college career of studying law, political science at North Carolina, Chapel Hill. At that age, you don't think that you can fail.
Soon, the loan was paid back, and Mike's Subs was selling around $1 million worth of sandwiches a year, the equivalent of nearly $7 million a year today.
So after taking over, it was 1975, and we just ran that one business for so many years. It was one of the largest volume shops in the nation, in the world, if you will. We were doing about 130,000 in gross sales per week in today's dollars. So we went from Mike's Subs to Jersey Mike's in 1987. Mike's was a little bit too generic, we thought, and Jersey is really where the product is from. Are you an authentic Jersey sub? It's kind of the state sandwich, if you will. So we started franchising in 1987 and really grew, and everybody wanted to come in. We didn't really try and market it to sell, it just people found out that we were growing. And we grew pretty well around Ocean and Monmouth County.
Most major fast food chains operate on a franchise model, which allows them to expand quickly and cheaply. To own a Jersey Mike's, local operators pay an initial fee of $18,500, put up around $500,000 to open a new store, and then pay an ongoing royalty of 6.5% of sales to license the brand.
And then in 1991, we were so committed to just spending everything that came in on marketing, on growth, on helping owners succeed, that all of a sudden the banking market fell out in the Northeast. One of the worst recessions for our company, for me, still today. And we had a layoff of my 6 employees that I had, including my brother John and everyone else on the staff. And I stood in the office alone and said, well, here I go. But everybody came back, of course. It was a tough time, well remembered, but something that looking back, I don't know how I could have prevented it. But today, that's an important part of your business plan, is that structure of financing and how you're going to grow.
Cancro redoubled his efforts, and by 1994, he had dug Jersey Mike's out of the hole and hired everyone back. By the end of the decade, Jersey Mike's had surpassed 100 locations.
It's funny, as we grew out of the state of New Jersey, no one knew who we were north of LA or in Seattle or in Ohio. But when we opened up, and we opened 1 store or 2 stores, we would always win the Reader's Choice Award from local people saying that we had the best sub.
Their sales per store are astronomically higher than all of the other sandwich sector peers.
Over the past 5 years, Jersey Mike's has averaged annual sales growth of 20.2% according to food service consulting firm Technomic, with revenue jumping from $1.3 billion in 2019 to $3.3 billion in 2023. They've nearly doubled their number of stores since 2019 and are now opening around 300 stores a year, everywhere from Alaska to Hawaii.
That kind of growth is unbelievable in the saturated United States sandwich market. It's unbelievable.
And yet, as they grow, they open locations strategically.
They have not overexpanded. Even now, at this point, they only have about 3,342 units in the United States. They have not overexpanded as had their other very large peer, Subway, which has been struggling for a number of different reasons. Subway has lost over 7,000 stores in the United States over the last 5 or 6 years.
It's not just the money-making that keeps franchisors happy, it's Cancrow's leadership.
Peter Cancrow has the reputation with his franchisees as being a straight shooter, a guy who in his early days actually showed up to work with franchisees and to sell franchisees in a battered station wagon.
During the pandemic, Jersey Mike's paid to have all their company and franchise restaurants remodeled.
That is unheard of in the restaurant franchise business, but they did it at a time when they knew that the restaurant economy was bad, well, the entire economy was bad, and that their franchisees needed it.
Potential Jersey Mike's franchisees are put through a vigorous screening process. The company claims only about 1% of people who apply to own a Jersey Mike's are approved, making it more competitive than getting into Harvard. Another reason is the startup costs.
Opening restaurants are not cheap. The funds just weren't available. When you're $120,000 in student loans, what bank is going to want to borrow money to a bunch of 20-something-year-olds in the midst of a pandemic? Me applying for the Rod Smith Award was kind of my last-ditch effort to Jersey Mike's.
A great way to snag a Jersey Mike's franchise is to work at Jersey Mike's. So far, Cancrow has awarded about 75 franchises to former employees and managers. He even co-signs these stores' leases and lends the lucky new franchisees money to cover startup costs.
I always love kind of asking them who wants to get their own store. Because of our program, the Rod Smith sponsorship program, we're trying to get as many that never would have dreamed about having their own business into their own business, and that is really one of the things that I take great pride and admiration for these young people and what they're doing. One of the key things too with the young people getting involved is that the landlords today won't take them, they don't have enough capital. So our company guarantees the lease for them, loans the money, and of course they pay it back over a 7 or a 10-year payout. But it establishes them as their own business, their entrepreneur. And it's really just so great to see and to watch.
It's not just employees the company looks to help. Cancrow looks for franchisees who are willing to get their hands dirty and buy wholeheartedly into the company's culture, which includes a focus on community and charitable giving.
When I was in high school, I watched Bob Hoffman of Hoffman's Ice Cream and Jack Baker of the Lobster Shanty give to the community, to the first aid. So when seeing that in high school, so when I took over senior year at 17, I said, this is what we're gonna do. So that's where it comes from, that giving. We're always giving to wherever our heart is drawn. That's where we go. And it's not planned. I come across different charities and we decide, you know what, let's do it. And I love that part of the business, and the owners are always all in with that as well.
You don't buy a Jersey Mike's, you're awarded a Jersey Mike's. And when you put this logo on, there's a lot of weight to this. When you put this logo on, you represent a brand that has spent since 1956 giving back, putting their money where their mouth is. And then in addition to that, making a great product with it. I don't know if there's any other business out there that does the giving back just at the scale that we do as a company.
And our giving day in March of every year, all owners put up all of their sales for the day. And last year, we raised over $25 million in one day. So that's a big part of our origin.
Cancrow's engaged in an aggressive marketing push, spending nearly $600 million over the past 3 years on marketing such as TV spots featuring fellow Jersey Shore native Danny DeVito, who debuted as Jersey Mike's first celebrity spokesperson in 2022.
We have never done that in the history of our company. Just felt that let's just keep talking about our product, talking about our people, talk about our restaurants. But I considered it. They brought in Danny DeVito, and we met, and I knew right away that it was the right move. He grew up in Asbury Park, New Jersey, the Jersey Shore, very close to Point Pleasant, and we just sort of hit it off right from the beginning. But if you watch Danny on the commercials, he comes across very real, genuine, and heartfelt. It was incredible how it really helped our momentum as a company. People sort of laughed along with us and just sort of smiled, and it really, really was effective, for our brand to grow.
Cancrow is seizing that momentum, with plans to open another 5,000 stores in the next 5 years and 300 in Canada in the next decade.
I think at 17, I didn't think it could grow to this point, but always aggressive and going after it, and what I was taught from my coaches as a youth, playing football, basketball, baseball. That helped rear me up and kind of tell myself that there's nothing you can't do. I remember being in California, one of the first stores we opened, and a lady walked in and she actually looked at me and goes, "What are you, from Jersey?" And I looked right at her. I go, "Yeah, you got a problem with that?" And she goes, "Oh, no." But it was just so automatic. And she said, "Oh, no, I'm sorry." But we both laughed, and it was just so great. But that's sort of how it is. That the Jersey, you walk around with a little bit of pride. So, you know, and sort of like, we're going to take it and we're going to grow it and be nonstop.
Cancro denies rumors that he's selling soon, but after being so involved in this business for so many years, one can only speculate how much longer he'll want to hold on.
You know, people ask, did you ever have any second thoughts? And I go, no. You know, it's really just went with it and, you know, had a lot of fun for the past 49 years.
Peggy Johnson, thank you so much for sitting down with Forbes.
Thank you so much for having me, Maggie.
You are the CEO of Agility Robotics. You sit at the helm of an industry that Goldman Sachs expects to generate $38 billion by 2035. That is a lot of money. Tell us, what is Agility Robotics? What do you do?
Agility Robotics is a humanoid robot company. So it's a robot that stands as tall as a person. It has arms and legs and a head, and it can operate in environments that humans operate in.
So what are those environments? Where, and it's called Digit, correct?
Digit is the name of the robot. And there's a lot of places in our worlds that were built for humans. So shelves are only a certain height, as tall as humans can reach or as low as humans can reach. Aisles down a corridor are a certain width for humans to walk down. And so there are tasks in those environments that Digit can step in and operate in, where other perhaps types of robots might not be viable in those areas. They might be too big, or they can't reach high enough up. So that's what makes humanoid robots purpose-built for those situations.
So what you're describing sounds like warehouses, factories, manufacturing. Is that the primary sector in which you're operating?
Today it is. Those are the areas that first have a big demand for labor. It's hard to fill these kinds of jobs. And already they have quite a bit of automation in those big warehouses, but they tend to be islands of automation. So you'll find a conveyor belt bringing product along. The product then needs to be picked up by a human and set over onto perhaps an autonomous robot that zips it down a corridor. And so those are the areas where humanoid robots can step in and take over some of these very repetitive tasks that humans are still doing today. So it'll be the connector between these islands of automation.
Interesting. What other applications are there for Digit and for Agility's products?
So Digit is a multi-purpose robot. And although we're starting in the logistics area because the demand is so high there, Digit can learn new skills. It can operate in the healthcare industry, retail, transportation. There's a whole world out there. But we're starting where the demand is highest and where we have the current feature set that can meet that demand. But AI now will be able to help us teach Digit new skills very quickly to move into these other markets.
Oh, I have so many follow-up questions. Let's start with healthcare, because we hear so much about the shortages of doctors and nurses and the burnout rates. Are robots going to be my primary care practitioner soon?
I think you'll never take a human out of the loop, but you can really see a robot coming in and maybe just doing some of the task work that happens inside of an operating room or inside of a doctor's office, just bringing instruments to the doctor, not perhaps doing everything the doctor does, and certainly there's an empathy side that you want to keep in the loop. But a lot of the other tasks that nurses and other healthcare personnel find to be, a bit of a drudgery part of their job, you can see a robot stepping in and taking that, leaving the human to do the part of the job that they really enjoy most.
Which hopefully is talking to people in a
Exactly.
better way than a robot would. Now, you mentioned demand, and I'm really curious, what does demand for Digit from corporations tell you about the state of the economy and the general supply of labor in this country?
Well, we're in a tough situation because these jobs in the logistics area alone there's over 1 million jobs that are going unfilled. So we can't find people right now to step into these jobs. And that number has been accelerating. It was about 600,000 just a few years back. Part of what's going on in the logistics area is we all love our next day delivery or 2-day delivery. And that puts a heavy burden on these logistics facilities to turn product around quickly and get it shipped out the door. And so the more that becomes an expectation for each of us, the more of a burden it comes onto that logistics facility to find somebody to step into those roles. So in that area alone, the demand is great and growing, and you can see very much a replication of that across other industries. So right now, when you look across industries, it's almost uncapped, the need for some device to step in and take over these sorts of jobs.
Because the people just aren't filling those jobs.
Right, and you really can think of these as tasks. They're parts of jobs that somebody has to do for a certain amount of their 8-hour shift. And I almost don't even want to call it a job because it's just something that has to get done. You want to free people up to learn new features and new skills inside these facilities, to become perhaps the manager of the fleet of robots, giving that person a digital job that they never would have had access to before if all they did was the physical part of the job. So it's really trading cycles, giving the dull, repetitive, sometimes injury-prone jobs or tasks to the robot, and giving the job or the career to the person who's managing the robot.
So it sounds like for folks who might be afraid that a robot will take their job, your answer is no, it just might change your job.
Right, and it will change out the parts of your job that you didn't love and allow you to focus on moving up in your career, learning new skills, showing more of your creative side. So those, hopefully we can take off the dull jobs, the dull tasks, give those to the robot and allow the human worker to bloom.
I feel like robots and humanoid robots sound like sci-fi, which is where a lot of those consumer concerns come from. What do you think the other big misunderstandings are?
Yeah, we've all seen those sci-fi movies, and so we have to overcome a bit of that. I think the biggest misunderstanding is that robots are going to take jobs. They're not. They're going to take tasks. They're going to take those parts of your daily job that you didn't want to do, that are not very exciting, they might be physically challenging. That's what we can have the robot do, and leave the human worker to learn new skills, to actually have a career versus just a set of tasks that they're completing throughout the day. And these jobs, there's so many that are going unfilled anyway. It makes sense to put a humanoid robot into these spots.
Now, Agility has 2 lines of business that helps drive revenue. What are those business lines?
So we have the physical robot itself, and we also have a layer of software that sits on top of the robot. And both of those will continue to evolve and expand. But over time, you can think of that layer of software as actually moving into almost an app store, just like we have on our phone. So you can come in and very quickly get a company up and running on some of the existing applications that sit on the software layer per whatever need they have in their facility.
Now, speaking of making money, Agility is revenue generating. It's an early stage startup, but you are generating revenue.
We do have revenue, yes.
And you have an announcement related to this, I believe.
We do. We have just stepped in to become the first humanoid to be commercially deployed. We are on the warehouse floor of a company called GXO, a third-party logistics provider just outside of Atlanta, and we are moving product for them. We are taking shift work, and the line it just moves along, and Digit has stepped in and is moving product for them in those areas that I talked about, the islands of automation. It's connecting those two areas.
Interesting, and this is the first application of a humanoid in this way.
The very first, yes. So we have put Digit to work.
And that's quite quick. You took the helm of this company just in March.
In March, right. So the company was on a good trajectory already, and we're just narrowing the focus to some initial use cases that we can concentrate on where the need is greater, but we will continue to add to those use cases over time.
What else is part of your mandate as new CEO of Agility?
Well, we want to make sure that we understand a customer's problem and we bring to them the solution that can solve for that. So we do have areas where people just want to innovate and see what the robot can do. We are very much focused on putting the robot to work. So we want to make sure that with Digit's current set of skills, that we put the robot to work solving a problem that has a need today, because that's very possible. It's not a futuristic thing. Digit can work today. So that's what I'm focused on. And if we don't find that when we're talking to a customer, because we don't have the skill set yet, we move on, because the demand is so great just in that area.
Mm. And you price the humanoids comparable to a human worker, less than a human worker? How do you structure that?
Yeah, so when we come in and talk to companies, generally they're looking for an ROI of under 2 years, and we can meet that for compared to a human salary and the full comp package that surrounds putting a human to work for that same period of time.
So after 2 years, then the robot becomes cheaper?
Correct.
So that does seem a little risky for human workers, but you still think it's the task that is being taken and people aren't going to lose their jobs over this?
Right. It's a job that can't be filled to start with.
I see.
And so we're going to stay focused on that, because that's where the need is near term. Longer term, we are a multi-purpose robot, and we can go off into other directions to augment the human workers and not to replace them.
Well, you mentioned transportation, and the first time I heard you say that, I thought, like, oh, high-speed rail, will this make it faster? Selfishly, I think that's what I want to see. But
I love that idea. We'll start thinking about it.
There you go. Add it to your to-do
list.
Yes. While we're talking about the technology and trust, I am curious. There are so many deep fake videos on the internet today, and a lot of deep fakes can surround robotics. I could be watching a video of a robot doing something on my computer that it is not actually doing in real life. So how do you think about instilling trust in consumers and the business community when you put out videos of Digit and other Agility products?
We are very pragmatic in our videos, and we show what Digit can do today. And I think the real proof point is now stepping in to a customer and providing value, providing hours to that customer to put on their factory floor and do real work. That's the proof point right there. We're not about making fancy videos and showing what the robot can do in the future. We're about what the robot can do today.
You sit in such an interesting seat today, but you have also had a really fascinating journey to get to where you are today. And that journey starts with being a sibling in a very large family. Can you tell me, how many siblings do you have?
I have 14 brothers and sisters, so I'm one of 15.
You're one of 15.
Yes.
I'm going somewhere with this. What does being one of 15 do for your leadership abilities? Do you think you are a CEO because you grew up in such a large family?
I do. And being the second to the youngest, I wasn't the youngest. I didn't get all the attention. I was just one of the middle ones, what was it? Jan Brady from the Brady Bunch. I was somewhere in the middle. So not the oldest, not the youngest, but being nearer to the bottom, the lower ages, I was a big listener, and it was hard anyway to get a word in edgewise, as you might imagine, at our family dinner table. And so I became a listener. And that, I think, has been one of the areas that I was able to leverage in my management roles over the years, and then my CEO roles.
Oh, that's so interesting. And I'm sure many personalities too. You learn how to juggle the family dinner table in the same way you learn how to juggle the C-suite meeting or the board meeting?
Yeah, we had one of every kind. So it's definitely understanding personalities, understanding the other person's point of view. That's always helped me in negotiations. And it all started, I think, going back to that dinner table.
That's amazing. And then you went to college as a business major, but you eventually changed to engineering. Why?
Well, I loved math and science, and I was asked about what I wanted to be in high school, and I thought, well, my older brothers and sisters went into business, I guess I'll go into business. No one ever, during all of my high school years, mentioned the words engineer to me, ever. Never thought it was a good fit. And yet I loved all of the sciences. I loved, we had a high school where we took calculus in high school. I think I took 2 years of calculus in high school. It was a great public school from up near Los Angeles area. But why that wasn't presented to me, I think it was because, women generally didn't go into the engineering field, so it wasn't even considered an option. And so I went off to San Diego State, and I was a business major, and I had a job on campus because I was putting myself through college. And I walked into the engineering department one day to deliver mail, and the two administrative assistants behind the desk thought I was there to learn about engineering, to ask about getting a degree in engineering. And I said, nope, just here to deliver the mail. And they said, well, do you know anything about engineering? And I said, I really don't. I had no idea what an engineer did in their profession. And so they sat me down and walked me all through the different types of engineering that I could go into. And then at the end of the conversation, they pushed the papers across the table to change my major. So that night I filled it out, came in the next day, became an engineering major.
Became an engineering major and then got a job in engineering in the 1980s. What was it like as a young woman in your first job?
There weren't very many women, definitely, in my first job. But oddly, I had a female manager, which I am so thankful for. And she instilled so much confidence in the women on her team. She really bolstered us in a kind of a tough environment. Being oftentimes we were the only, singly, we were the only women in a room of men. And she, walked us through strategies to have your voice being heard. And that really kept me engaged and in the field when so many of my fellow graduates were gone from the field after about the first 5 years. I would check back in with them and they said, well, it just wasn't quite right for me, and they moved on. But she was a real, just such a role model and kept me in place through those early, more challenging years.
It's a real example of you have to see it to believe it and to be it.
Exactly. And as she was there and I looked up at her and I thought, I can do that.
What have you taken from her or from other mentors in your career that you're bringing with you into agility and your more recent roles?
I think for me, the biggest takeaway, my biggest learning of my entire career was just to be myself. Because as I went on to my next job and did not have a female manager at my next job, I was oftentimes criticized during performance reviews for not speaking up enough, for not talking enough in meetings. And it became a detriment to my upward mobility in these companies. And I thought, well, but I'm a good team builder. I fit in well in these environments. My work product was good. So this is what's holding me back. Maybe I need to leave too. And then I thought, well, no, maybe I'll try and be that person they want me to be. I tried to be louder in meetings, and one day I even hit my hand on the table and said, "I want to speak," and everybody looked at me startled and said, "What's wrong with Peggy?" Because I wasn't myself for sure. And then my manager said, "You know what? You just be yourself, and that will carry you through." And he was right. That actually gave me the confidence to be the introvert that I was. And I did communicate, but not always in a big meeting. I would go to someone's office, or I'd call them or send an email. And that was my form of communication. So although it wasn't the same as perhaps the others in the room, I was communicating, I was getting my point across. And he helped others recognize that. And I'm very grateful for that.
How have you identified the opportunities in your career? You said just now that you felt like your personality was a detriment, and then you found ways to overcome that. But then how have you identified the opportunities that help take your career to the next levels and to get to where you are now?
Well, I had a manager early on. I was in engineering, and I used to raise my hand when they needed an engineer to go out to customer sites and explain what our product did. I really enjoyed that. And he said, "You have antenna for people. You're a good listener. I've seen you in action. You should think about doing something different, maybe going into sales." And I thought, "Oh no, I can't go into sales. I'm an engineer. I'm not a salesperson." The engineers always used to make fun of the salespeople too. So that was something I was never going to do. But he kept pushing and said, "You just need to get out of your comfort zone a little bit." And you have that little knot of worry in your stomach, and you think, "Can I do this? Can I do this?" And a couple months went by, and I went back to him and I said, "I think I'm ready to try that." And I moved over into the sales area, and I learned a new skill. And then from there, I moved over into the product area, and I learned a new skill. But each time I made that transition, I felt that little knot of worry. Can I really do this? The imposter syndrome. I don't think I'm able to. But I had some very, very, very supportive managers along the way who kept me moving. And it was that aggregate of experience that got me to where I am today.
I generally don't like to ask women, what's it like now as a woman in robotics? But there are so few female CEOs who sit in seats like yours. So I won't ask what it's like now, but I will ask, how is the industry doing? Has it changed enough from when you were an early employee?
It has changed, for sure, and I celebrate that. I celebrate that because I have a daughter who's coming up, and I want to ensure that the world for her is different than the world for me. So we have made progress, and that has been good because now we have more women as role models to look up to. Younger women can see that more and more. Definitely more to do, of course, but it does feel very different. It feels more inclusive. By the way, not just of women, inclusive of everybody. Mm-hmm. And actually the management team that I inherited when I stepped in at Agility is wildly diverse. In a tech field, there's several women. There's different ethnic groups. We have my CMO is part of the LGBTQ community, but they were the right person for the job. And that has built the company into what it is today. We have a working robot. We have the capability of showing that we can help humans with these repetitive, dull tasks that they have to do. It was that team, it was those different voices all speaking together and rowing in the same direction that got to the company. So it's proof that having that kind of diversity of thought is very valuable for companies.
So you say they were the best people for the job, these folks on your team who represent diverse communities. Yet it's also very good for business. Yet it's also something that's under fire right now in different parts of the country, in different political circles. What responsibility do you feel now in your current role to serve as an example? And did you think about this also when you were CEO of Magic Leap, which was working in augmented reality, which is another type of technology that can benefit from diversity?
Well, look, as a CEO, I have a responsibility to my shareholders to build revenue and to deliver revenue. And for me, I want to make a product that serves the broadest market. How do I do that? I have to hear from more people, not just one group. I think if I had a team full of Peggy Johnsons, I would build a product that I would love, but I wouldn't be able to sell it to most of the world. That's not being responsible as a CEO. So for me, I take that very seriously. I want to understand everything that can go into a product that can open my market as wide as possible so I can deliver that revenue for my shareholders.
You were saying you had a story that came to mind?
Yeah, back in the early days of Qualcomm, we actually built mobile phones. I don't know if you remember that, but there was a period of time that Qualcomm built mobile phones. And I remember we built one of the first smartphones, and it had some early data capabilities, but it was very, very big. And the engineers were so proud of it. And the first time I saw it, they handed it to me. It was huge and heavy, and I said, where do I carry this? And they said, well, you just put it in your pocket. Well, I didn't have a pocket big enough for that. And then they said, well, then you put it in your purse. And I thought, well, what use is it in my purse? It's just too big. But most of my comments were ignored, and off we went with a very big device, and we sold it to mostly men. I think it was 80% men was the market at the time. And if we had just had a few other voices saying, hey, maybe one of the priorities should be to make it a bit smaller, so at least it's manageable for smaller people, which
smaller
I was
people
one.
And people who often wear clothing that don't have pockets.
Doesn't have pockets, exactly. So I always think, even today, maybe the mobile phone would look different if we had had more women back then, because even today, oftentimes women put their mobile phone in their purse, though there are more and more women's clothes with pockets now. Even wedding dresses I've seen that have pockets.
I think that's one thing people of all political opinions can agree on. Pockets in dresses and skirts are a really good thing.
Are really good, I agree.
Okay, so we have a few questions that we ask everyone on the 50 over 50, and I want to ask them to you now. Is being over 50 an advantage or disadvantage in your current line of work?
Absolutely an advantage, because I have this plethora of experiences that one has built on the other, that's built on the other through several companies. And I couldn't have done that in a compacted amount of time. And I had to live, by the way, through the highs and lows of different projects and different companies' cycles. All of that is cumulative to the experience I bring today in my current role. So it's absolutely an advantage, and I wouldn't have it any other way.
Now, before we started rolling, we were talking about running.
Yes.
You are a runner. You recently completed the Tokyo Marathon. Tell me what you learned running this marathon, because I think it's a running lesson, but it's also a life lesson.
Well, it's interesting. I have been working on and just completed in Tokyo the Abbott World Majors. So these are the largest marathons around the world. There's a set of 6 of them, and Tokyo was the last one. And I would say with the first 5, I was always thinking about my time. What is my time going to be? And I have to, try and go faster. And it's a burden to feel that all through the marathon. And I decided with this marathon, my last, I just wanted to enjoy it. And I wanted to look at the sights of Tokyo and take in the crowds and the noise and the splendor of it all. And that's what I did. And I remember thinking, usually in the 20s, mile 21 and above, things aren't pleasant. And I loved it. I loved every minute of it. Like, I was enjoying it. I crossed the line and I thought, I could keep going. That is the first time that's ever happened. But it really taught me that, I think that was the more important way to go, to enjoy it in the moment. And that's what I did in Tokyo.
Well, maybe an ultra is in your future if you felt like you could keep going.
Possibly. The thought crossed my mind that day. Possibly.
Oh my goodness. Well, speaking of the future, what's next for you? What's next for you as a person, and what's next for you as the CEO of Agility?
Well, right now we are heads down working on our next generation product, expanding use cases, teaching agility or teaching Digit new skills. So that's my near-term focus, and I will continue to do that. Longer term, I would love to do something in the political arena. I know it's crazy. It sounds crazy right now, given the current environment, but that is a goal of mine that I've held, and someday I think
Run
I'll
for
head
office?
that direction. I'd rather be appointed. I don't know. Running seems very challenging. So that's the future.
So future ambassador, maybe.
That would be great.
All right, you heard it here first. You're going to have to come back and sit down with us when you get that role.
Okay, I'll definitely do that.
Peggy Johnson, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Maggie. Thanks for having me.
The redemptive power of reinvention. Gotta love that quote. We'll tell you why it means so much to Ashley Bell. He is the CEO of Redemption Holding Company. It's a holding company that is in line to purchase a bank in Utah. Very interesting strategy. We'll talk about it right now at the NASDAQ. Hello everyone, it's Jabbar Young here at the NASDAQ, and I am joined by Ashley Bell. He is the CEO of Redemption Holding Company, a holding company formed to purchase Holiday Bank and Trust in Utah. He's also the CEO of Ready Life's fintech company, National Bank, Black Bank Foundation, right? You're running that too. It's a lot on your plate, man.
It's a lot going on.
Yeah, man. Ashley,
stuff.
how is everything, man? How you
everything's amazing, brother. Just appreciate you taking time to elevate these sorts of stories, and thank you for what you're doing.
Yeah, well, listen, man, we appreciate the time, so thank you for coming. I always start these conversations because we're at the stock market. You got to give me a stock, right? What is something that's worked for you, or that you're looking to buy, something that maybe is off the radar?
Yeah, you know, first off, when I look at stocks, first I realize that I have a lot going on, so I make sure I hire the right people that are investing in the right stocks for me. I spend a lot of my time trying to do in private deals that are about to IPO. Yeah. So my story is like, before they get here is where I want to be. I want to get in right before the IPO, and there's a lot of great things right now, especially in the life science sector, that I think are poised to make big hits next year. So I'm telling everybody, look in life sciences before they go to market. There's lots of capital out there looking for life science. I think IPOs are going to be really strong.
Life sciences, I love that, man. Listen, we are in October as we talk, right? So, you know, Halloween's coming up. What's your favorite scary movie of all time?
Oh, favorite scary movie? You know, I got to go back when I was a kid. Like, what scared me as a kid? Arachnophobia, brother.
Arachnophobia?
Those spiders were crazy, man. They were like the size of trucks. Eating everybody up. So I didn't like that.
I remember the preview and the clips, man, but I'm like, nah, this is too much. I thought you would go Michael Myers or Chucky or something like that. But
truck-sized spiders.
Those spiders, man. Are you going to dress up as a spider? Is that possible?
No, you know, I like to keep it classy on Halloween. I try to go for celebrities and characters in my favorite movies type of
absolutely. Well, listen, let's dive into a little bit of news, right? Ready Life, the fintech company that you are running. You guys have a new pilot program in Cleveland, right? And Ready Life is a fintech company, and you're looking to eliminate credit scores and use cash flow to underwrite a lot of these loans. So take me into this pilot program, which you're going to help, you know, low and moderate income borrowers to try to be homeowners, right?
Yeah, I mean, we think there's untapped value. The market hasn't really seen a way to really de-risk mortgages for people that don't have great credit scores. And inherently, when you look at credit scores, the numbers say that people of color are outside the normal boxes that banks use. 54% of African Americans are thought to not have a high enough credit score to even get a mortgage. It's a really sad situation to live in a country where the majority of one race of people don't qualify to own the roof over their head. So we know that that's not true, that there's people of all shapes and sizes and colors that are paying rent every month, that many times is more per square foot than the people that are owning the homes in the same neighborhood. So for us, you just got to get away from using traditional credit scores or augment them with cash flow based sort of understanding of how people live, how do they spend their money. Let's separate how someone spends money on their needs versus their wants. It's one thing to take a vacation and run your credit cards up for the summertime because you want your kids to go on a good vacation, you want to take an anniversary trip, and that credit utilization can tank your credit score. Which means for the next 3 to 6 months, you can't buy a home or get a good interest rate. But the whole time, you paid your rent, you took care of your car, you took care of all the things that you know you need to take care of. We want to create a system where those things matter and you can separate the two. Because Ready Life, what we're doing is we're building mortgage payments around rent payments. So if you can pay $3,000 a month for rent, then of course you can pay $2,800 a month for a mortgage. It's the same thing, but you own it and you'll take care of it, and it'll be a bigger priority because you're building equity with every payment instead of handing that money to someone else. So that's what we're doing in Cleveland. We have a program where we're solving for both sides, Jawar, which is like, How do you get someone access to credit, which means we're going to be a hard money lender. We can determine our own rates. We can hard money lend them the money to own a home. But at the same time, we're partnering with land banks throughout the Midwest. A land bank is a quasi-governmental agency where most of the time they take state forfeitures. Meaning a house in a neighborhood, for whatever reason, the government takes it because eminent domain could have had drugs or crime there. And there's these whole repositories of houses. And so we partner with local governments to say, we'll take this home, we'll put our own money in it to rehab it, to get it right. But what I'll also do is sell it below market value. Meaning that if it costs me $200,000, $250,000 to fix it, then I'm going to sell it for no more than 10% over what it cost me to actually fix it. So that's affordable housing.
All right. Is there a risk though? Because when I first see no credit checks, I'm starting to think of the era of the no doc, no credit loans, which may have helped the financial crisis or led to that, where a whole bunch of people were buying houses and they probably couldn't afford it and they probably shouldn't have been accepted anyway because of no credit scores, right? Is there a risk in that, or does the cash flow, does that tell you something else?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. We never want to put someone in a house just to have a house.
All right.
The goal is to create generational wealth. So none of this works. Our goal, and understand my business partner is Dr. Bernice King, the youngest daughter of Martin Luther King Jr. When we set out on this journey, it was to create generational wealth for people, because we understand in our country racial and economic injustice are inseparable twins. Those are my words. Those are her father's words. You can't have a conversation in America about race or let's talk about economics as well. So for us, you de-risk it by just using common sense. When you go into someone's bank account, you can tell what they spend their money on, and you get it real time. I would argue that our data is better than credit scores because the credit scores are updated much less frequently than what we're doing. And we're separating needs versus wants. Humans function differently when we spend things on what we have to spend them on versus what we want to spend our money on. And so our data is better, it'll be more accurate, and fundamentally, we're never gonna let someone get a mortgage payment that is more than their rent payment. But also, by using hard money loans, we can reimagine what mortgages look like. Let's look overseas at the UK, for example. Look at what the UK is doing to get younger homeowners into homes. They're reimagining the timeline. So instead of a 30-year fix, you got 40-year fixed. You got 45-year fixed. Now, what does that do? That means that over the lifetime of a loan, you would pay more if you had a 40-year fix. But who has never refinanced their mortgage though, from beginning to end? That's not practical, right? But by doing a 40-year fixed mortgage or a 45, you lower that monthly payment. Now you're in strike zone because you automatically have, you can get closer to what they're paying in rent most times. But again, remember, these mortgages are also eligible to be sold on the secondary market for me because a couple of things. Sometimes they're going to be CRA eligible, which is Community Reinvestment Act. But also, many times, like I said, because I'm charging people less than market value, that also allows us for them to have equity day one, which means the loan value versus how much they owe is totally within range. So you got 60% equity day one. That de-risk it for the bank. So if you want to know what's de-risking, see the loans you were talking about, the no docs, those people had zero equity. It was doomed from the beginning because they were only paying interest. Principal never went down. But if you walk into a loan and you got 60% of it, or 60 to 40% equity, then the bank's de-risk. Because even if it did go wrong, they have a lot of equity to fall back on. And for that family, think about them. If something were to go wrong with them, healthcare crisis, emergency, they immediately have a safety net. But they also have the financial literacy from mom to pop to daughter to son to know how to manage that new access to capital so they can take those high loan credit cards, those high interest rate credit cards, and refinance them into a package that can be attached to a second lien on their house, but get those interest rates down.
Why Cleveland? Why that city? I mean, phenomenal place, right? Been there through a whole bunch of times, but I look at it, a whole bunch of other cities. I'm from Philly. They could probably use the help. Places in Texas, you're in LA, Atlanta area. Like, why Cleveland?
Well, when you look at the Midwest as a whole, you've seen a lot of population drain. So Cleveland's where we're starting. The Midwest as a region is amazing for this particular reason. A lot of the industry that was there has moved to the South. It moved to other places. And so you've had population drain. You have a lot of dilapidated homes. But the cost of living is really affordable. And so when you look at these numbers, you're talking about an average home is 2,000 square foot. It's like 250,000. I can't get that in LA, can't get that in Atlanta either. But in Cleveland, you can actually create affordable housing. for the people that live there and the people who are working remotely around the country who are like, well, you know what? I can move to Cleveland and get a house here and bring my remote job where I'm making $150,000, and now I'm doing great and I'm adding to the Cleveland community. So I think in both ways it works good. But also there was a guy named Gus Frango who is the leader of the Cuyahoga County Land Bank, who really saw this as an opportunity to really go after people who are working and working hard and having a hard time to get ahead. And Gus Frango was the president of the Cuyahoga County Land Bank, who started this, and we named the program after Gus. Unfortunately, Gus passed right after we started the program, and so we call it the Gus Golden Door Initiative because of him.
Yeah. Well, listen, man, take me inside of Ready Life right fast, right? I mean, it's raised over $3 million, right? Is there any update there? You guys raised any more money since?
Oh yeah. We're way past $3 million.
Way million. Yeah. How much?
So we just secured another $50 million just for this program.
Okay.
So this is going to churn out our ability to create mortgages and then put them on a secondary market. So with the $50 million of secured line that we have now, we're able to continue this process of getting people in homes, seasoning those loans, and then putting them in the secondary market.
Was it a Series A, Series B?
Oh, that's his line of credit. The Series A for us, we were over $10 million.
You're over $10 million?
Just for the tech piece, because the tech piece is this, because what you're hearing is, the reason I'm able to do this, because I'm not a developer. I'm not a developer just coming here to develop an offset. Like, at Ready, when it raised $10 million, was to get the tech together. The tech is replacing the credit scoring system. The tech is being able to have alternatives by which people can have their risk assessed, and we'll start with mortgages, but we think it can sort of recalibrate the entire system.
Yeah, well, I mean, that gets into the redemption side, and I get to that in a minute, but so just to be clear, all together, I'm seeing over $60 million raised for Ready Life?
10 million for Ready.
10 million for Ready.
A, and then we're doing mortgages, so you're not going to spend company money on mortgages.
Right.
You got warehouse lines. That's how people do most companies. Yeah. Who you're talking to, big warehouse lines that crank this stuff out.
Yeah.
We're able to secure $50 million for that.
How many employees at Ready Life?
30.
30 right now, and based in LA and Atlanta.
We are. We're the remote folks that we're talking about. I got folks trying to get a house in Cleveland now, but this is for everybody else.
Yeah. Now listen, man, and again, we take the platform you're trying to build with Ready Life, and then you have Redemption Holding Company, which again is trying to purchase the bank in Utah. And I was listening to a podcast you did, and you were kind of talking like, hey, one day we got to talk about combining the bank along with the tech, right? And having that infrastructure, because when you look across America, black banks, as legit as they are, the only issue they're having is fintech, right? I mean, there's a whole bunch of banks I would love to do business with, but I'm like, man, you have no mobile platform that I can rely on. And so is that the end goal there?
It's funny. It's like the old adage of rappers and athletes.
Yeah.
Rappers want to be athletes want to be rappers. Banks want to be fintechs want to be banks. They love each other, they idolize each other, but they're two different worlds, right? Two different skill sets.
Yeah.
And so you're in an era now where fintechs were moving the needle very quickly with financial technology and doing things that banks were just too slow to do. But I think that era is coming to an end. I think that the regulatory posture now is that banks have to are being held more accountable for the fintechs they partner with. And you're going to see banks start acquiring more fintechs or having to do it themselves. All sorts of reasons. KYC is one, know your customer. That was kind of just out there for a while. And I think the regulators are bringing it back in. So, but to your point, the redemption in that context, we have to think through not only just having another African-American controlled bank in our country, but what is a type of bank that we don't have? So when you talk about fintechs, you and I both can name black-owned fintechs that were created post-George Floyd that were out here to try to bridge the wealth gap and do all these great things. They were banking as a service, meaning that you could get your debit card from them. They would create an online account, and you felt like you were banking with the black fintech. But the problem was there's not one African-American owned bank that platform could sit on top of.
Right.
So what you were actually doing was accelerating the wealth gap sometimes. Because if I go in Atlanta and get my haircut and I use an app that is not sitting on top of a black-owned bank that I do bank at, I just sucked my money out of the black bank, gave it to somebody else, and sent it right out of Atlanta, right? So we have to be able to think through how do we create financial infrastructure in the community so that these companies can't pump marketing dollars further into the community, extract the money, and then leave us with what?
Yeah, nothing. Right. Are you talking of maybe having Ready Life sit on top of every last black bank in America as a fintech? Is that maybe the goal?
Well, look, I do believe that what Ready Life will be able to do is be a leader in trying to rethink risk when it comes to cash flow. Banks are banks, brother. And so at the end of the day, I think redemption needs to be a part of the larger conversation about what the future of banking looks like. Because to your point, what you just said is the key to whether or not black banks exist in the next 20 years. 64% of African Americans, they've said, would switch a bank, with the bank they're banking with now, to a black-owned bank if the technology was what they wanted. That technological gap must be bridged, because a lot of our black banks now are holding on because of our parents, the churches that we attend, the businesses in these communities who love them. But the reality is, for them to succeed, the technology gap has to be bridged. And so you have to think through, what should the next generation of African American owned banks look like? And I challenge, any entrepreneur, if you want to make money in this industry or any other industry, whether you're black, white, or otherwise, you have to be able to get customers from everywhere, of all backgrounds. The black bank should not just serve black people. It should be competitive and should be able to support any customer in any place in America, just like every other bank.
Yeah. Well, listen, man, you talk about the next generation of banks, right? Let's flash back, right? You grew up in Gainesville, Georgia, right? Your mom was a school teacher. Your dad fought in Vietnam, worked at Johnson & Johnson. What's the biggest thing you learned from your parents?
I think from my mom, it was empathy for people. My mother helped integrate schools. One of the first black teachers in a system that didn't have any. And not only was she a place of familiarity and safety for black kids that came into the system, but she also was a peer to white teachers to help them understand the homes that they come from, the places that they come from. And I think at the surface, that era was tumultuous, but they were the teachers who really were the unspoken heroes of integration in our country. The people that had to touch those kids every day and get them from being yelled at outside of buildings to integrating into a world that was different for them. She's a part of that legacy. My father on that side was Johnson & Johnson, left and took they left the industrial engineering piece after NAFTA and went overseas. Like a lot of people did. They started producing overseas. So my dad lost his job. But what he did do is he decided that he would reinvent himself and would do what he was good at, which is being a man and a leader of young men, which is like me and my brother. And he became a warden at jail. I know a lot of those kids. And so at the end of the day, my lesson was, you don't look at people for what you see in front of you. You don't look at them just by resume, to LinkedIn profiles. People are complex, they have depth, they all have value. And that's what you're seeing with Ready Life, is I'm looking beyond the credit score. We're digging deeper, we're getting more information so we can see your whole value. People are more than a credit score, they're people, they're humans. And I think that's what I took from my parents, that I will always see more in people than what the labels people put next to them.
Banking is in your blood though, right? Your mom had some, side of the family had banks that they owned in the South and they lost it. But did you always want to be a banker when you were young, running around watching cartoons or scared of the spiders? Did you always want to be a banker then?
No, I always, I saw my mother and my father live impactful lives. So I knew that I would want to have impact. I was a partner at one of the largest law firms in the world. And I left that to a very nice, safe thing to do. Every lawyer, when you go to law school, you want to get to partner at the big firm, done that. But my job is to have impact. My life is to have impact. My purpose is to figure out, how do I leave this place better than what I was when I got here? And on top of that, I think that history is going to look back on what we did as a people, not as a black people, but as a human race after George Floyd and after many other instances around the world. And they'll study, our kids will study what we did or didn't do, what we said versus what we actually did. And I want the story to be told that good people of goodwill figured out a way to not just create great sound bites about what the problems are and what the solutions could be, but somebody got their hands dirty. Somebody tried to go along a path that wasn't paved and took risk. And they found people who were willing to take risk as well to make this world a little bit better. And if we all do that, in whatever industry we're in, then let history judge us kindly as the people who at least understood that we couldn't go back to the way we were. And that is what I hope that inspiration my parents gave me and others around this country give me every day that I bring to the marketplace.
And in college, you major in political science and then, law, end up at Denton's, as you said. What's the biggest thing you learned working there at the law firm?
Well, I gotta be honest, some of my biggest clients were the ones that told me, Ashley, you're smart, you solve our problems every day. You need to be on the other side of the table. You should go start a business, take that passion you have and help change this world. And some of those biggest clients were my first investors, first 7-figure checks to say, let's go do it. And some of them used to be lawyers. Yeah. So I would say that I took from that my dad when he lost his job. And I asked him, I said, well, I said it in a kid way, you know how that works. But essentially he was my age right now. And he had to start over. And you go from a Fortune 500 company to being a jailer at a jail, making 10%. And I don't know about you, but if we walked out of here right now with 10% of what we got, life would change very drastically.
Absolutely. We'd be driving Ubers on the side.
Driving Ubers on the side, exactly. So I asked my father what would I have to do to not be in his situation when I'm his age? Because I watched him basically mail the keys back to Johnson.
He told you to own the keys.
Yeah, he told me, you got to own the keys, son, if you don't want to be here.
Yeah.
And since then, I've been on a journey to figure out how to help other people own the keys to the houses where they would build their own memories.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, listen, man, let's go back to redemption right fast. How does one go about acquiring a community bank, right? Because again, you're trying to target Utah. I've been to Salt Lake City, Utah a lot, right? I mean, the only thing I don't like about it is all the bars close at 1:30. You got to go home. But I mean, Utah is like, when somebody thinks like, wow, why Utah? Like, what is the process? How do you start in case someone else looks up in a black community and says, I don't like the way that bank is running. Let me get some investors and see if I can purchase so we can save it, right? How does one start to buy a bank?
Yeah, you know, why Utah is a great question. First, it's just a pure business answer. I would tell you right now, it's just a numbers game because business is business, and it's the #1 state to do business right now. U.S. News and World Report, last 3 or 4 years, it's the #1 place. When it comes to banking in particular, return on assets for banks in Utah is higher than everywhere else in America. And when you look at, just to be honest, being African American, going to a place that doesn't have a lot of African Americans, you got to think about that culture that you're around there, right? This is the first time that we've had a bank acquired in this way, because most of our banks are created out of the black community. This is the first time we're going outside the black community and buying a bank somewhere else. You got to make sure that it's a good cultural fit. And I think specifically there, there's like an untapped sort of magic in Salt Lake City because you have a lot of people connected to the LDS Church, a lot. But the uniqueness about that is that you got a lot of people who, for 2 years, had to leave and do mission trips in places where they weren't the majority, had to learn the language and figure out how to serve. And so I think by coming there, I wasn't really surprised, but I was a little bit overwhelmed by the level of reception that we received. Dr. King, who's my business partner and co-founder in this, she has some existing deep relationships with some families there that goes back to her mother, Coretta Scott King. That was the entry point. So when Dr. King tells me if I had to live somewhere else outside of Atlanta, be Salt Lake City, my ears perked up.
Yeah,
and I'm like,
mine's would too. Salt Lake City,
right, so what
why?
are you doing? Right, so you start off with a regulatory environment that makes it conducive to return value to my investors.
Yeah.
And our road is one from, you know, acquiring this bank to being right here with you, being publicly traded. But then you stay and you can grow because of the people there who are willing to invest. Our cap table is a lot of African-American business leaders from around this country, doctors, lawyers, guys here on Wall Street, impressive. But at the same time, it's also a lot of people locally in Salt Lake City who say, we want you here. From the governor, Governor Spencer Cox, all the way to the president of Zion's Bank. Zion's is the big dog in town. They're the big bank. So if you're going to come into a market, the first question everybody's got is, what does Zion's think about it? And to have Zion's Bank, Scott Anderson, the president of that bank, say this is exactly what we need in Salt Lake City, I think it just bodes well for us to be able to take a small bank that is doing what it was meant to do, which is serve a small community of holiday, but to also create a digital forward bank that can reach African-American entrepreneurs, which is going to be our focus, really leaning into investing in those who are taking risk in our communities, from Detroit to Atlanta to Miami to Seattle. We no longer are 2 blocks off of Martin Luther King Jr. Drive or across the railroad tracks. The diaspora of black wealth is wide and varied, and it goes from coast to coast. We have to start building institutions that can actually help collect that wealth, but not do it by ourselves. There's allies who truly believe in the fact that economic justice is a key priority for them. And so we want Redemption to be an impact bank. This should be the bank that you understand, like all of our black banks do. They all do the mission work of loaning to people who might not get a loan other places, not because of de-risk, but because we still have discrimination in the financial system. There's still a trust barrier in the financial system. But an impact bank means while your dollars are sitting in our bank, we're doing the hard work and providing credit, because credit is like water. Where credit flows, opportunity grows. You show me a community with no opportunity, I'll show you one that doesn't have access to credit. That impact work is where every big foundation should be putting their money. If you are a philanthropic organization and you claim that you're doing impact work around this country, but you tell me that you're doing that, but your money's sitting in a bank that also might be causing the problem, then I ask you, you don't have to bank with me, but you should be banking your values.
Right.
Find a bank that's aligned to your values. And we think we can be a part of that chain reaction where people, just like the 60s, will start moving their money to align with their values. Shopping, in the 60s, where we ate, where we didn't eat, where we went and didn't go, was reflection of our values. This is the time for us to do it once again, to start aligning our values in the industry that has been unfortunately able to skirt by because people think they didn't have a choice. But we're going to create an option for people to say, if I want to impact bank, if I want to align my values, these are the generation of banks that are doing the hard work.
Couple more minutes, Ashley, I get you out of here, man, because you got a lot on your plate. You're CEO, you're running the Black Bank Foundation, you got Ready Life Entertainment, Ready Entertainment. We didn't even go into that yet. But, you know, right fast, you know, stand with Holiday Bank and Trust. In 2022, at the end of it was $68 million in total assets. What is it today in total assets?
Yeah, well, the call report's coming out. I want to get ahead of that, but I will say this. You know, we've been able to secure from people who understand what I just told you, the impact that this could have. As we get ready to do everything we need to do this change of control, we've got commitments for over $100 million of deposits today, and that's growing. I think these are people who are saying, Ashley, I want to know that my money is sitting in a bank that's doing the work. And some people have researched the banks they're with, and they understand that those banks may not be aligned, and they want to move their money, especially people in the philanthropic world. They have to go out to their donors and say, look, we're doing the good work, but we also are making sure that the people we partner with are aligned with our values. At the end of the day, you know, we have to get regulatory control, and we're going to make sure that we're doing everything we can to move as methodically as possible. Once this control is done, to grow as soundly as possible, because the last thing you want to have is a bank fail. Because at the end of the day, there's only 20 African-American owned banks today. Yeah. And Dr. King. 23. 23. Yes. The rule's a little.
Yeah, I know. Board control and all that.
Yeah. So let's just say 22 to be safe.
More than 20.
More than 20. If you say more than 20, when we used to have over 140.
Yeah, this number's still low.
The number is incredibly low when it was over 140 in the 60s, right? So what we have to do is be able to grow in a way that allows us to get income, not just from loans. And so this is what sports syndications deals will be able to do for us. We work with all the black banks to be able to do deals with the National Football League, this is the Black Bank Foundation, to be able to create an apparatus by which we can all pool our resources together and do big deals with big sports. Yeah. And because to me, and you know from covering sports in your day, these are industries that are making a lot of money off of black and brown bodies and talent.
Absolutely.
And if they're doing that, why not allow them an opportunity to put that money back into the communities that is producing those profits? Yeah. And so we think there's a unique opportunity to create fee-based income, not just interest income, that can help us grow a lot more soundly and a lot more stably.
Yeah. Well, while I have you, man, you know, we're talking about banks, and you know, so much more we can talk about. So I know I have to have you back. You know, we even get into the predatory versus profitable and all of that stuff. But you know, listen, we are days and days, weeks, I should say, before the election, and you know, talking economic policy. You know, on one end you have Vice President Harris. You know, she wants to increase, you know, child tax credits, $50,000 for entrepreneurs, a lot of stuff that it still needs to get through Congress and Senate. You know, she does get elected. And on the other side, former President Trump, you know, he wants the interest on car loans eliminated, and double taxing and taking the taxes off of tips. And you look at his tariff proposals, which a whole bunch of institutions, you know, one, Peterson says, hey, this is going to add $1,700 a year to my, you know, median family taxes, and $15 trillion over 10 years. Again, two sides of the fence. It all depends. What isn't being talked about specifically with the black community? What economic policy? What should people be listening to in these last few weeks?
Yeah, I think that first off, you hit the nail on the head. You're going to always have to make sure, no matter what the president says,
Congress and Senate.
There you go. Yeah. Congress and Senate has to be a part of the equation. And if something has never been done before, you got to ask yourself why. Yeah. Right. And so that's a big part of it. But I think we always have to ask conversations around what we just talked about. Nobody's talking about why we have the credit scoring system we have that is determining whether or not my family or your family gets access to credit, our friends in the neighborhoods that we come from gets access to credit. I want to hear a conversation around what is a more fair and equitable system by which we lend money to people. Because right now you have 3 companies that are not run by the government, that have no ability for us to kind of put pressure on them, and they determine the whole show. When we know that there's data out there that can be better suited to determining and de-risking how we approach lending in this country. Until we address that in a way to have a real conversation, because there are people out here right now who can afford, well, let me just say it this way. It's still expensive to be poor in America.
Yeah.
As long as it's expensive to be poor, where people who make money don't get access to their money without paying high fines, that needs to be the #1 issue. Until we can figure out a way to get people who are working hard access to the money that they have in a way that they don't have to be spending a lot to get what they already earned, that needs to be the #1 issue to me. But you have to have that conversation at a multi-tiered level. And I also bring up the things we talked about with our land banks. If you live in a city right now and you have a land bank that is continuously increasing their inventory and bringing to properties in that are dilapidated, let's figure out how are you going to get that back on the property tax rolls. Because you know what, first thing, if those properties are on the property tax rolls, is increasing everybody else's property. But let's look at that as an opportunity to go to these cities, partner with us or somebody else and say, let's get a way to get people who can afford to own a home. Because that's what's affordable housing. People like to say affordable housing is a price tag. No, it's actually, can they afford it? Not just, is it 500,000 or 400,000? The number actually is, what are the people in that community making? What are they spending to keep a roof over their head? And if they're renting, how do they get access to owning? Because that one of the downsides that we've seen post-COVID and this real estate bust that we're having is that all the word residential housing is starting to become a farce. It's all commercial. People are taking homes that should be built for people, for residences, buying them up, putting them on Airbnb, putting them on all these other companies, and making money off of them. They're commercial now.
Yeah.
And everyday people can't compete with that. And so the American dream will be lost until somebody makes a hard stand and says, look, this is the key to creating wealth in this country. We've always talked about being a capitalist country, and we should be, and we need to be. But at the end of the day, can we really make it capitalist for everybody? Can we allow for a system that can give everybody access to the market, everybody access to the same opportunities? And what that means at the end of the day is that you have a unique opportunity this election to reset the table. And people need to be bold and not just go after what politicians tell you they're going to do, but we have to educate ourselves from Congress to Senate. But don't forget about your local elected officials. I worry that you're not worried about your school board, because at the end of the day, part of that financial literacy that we're talking about at Ready Life, when someone has to take a financial literacy class before they can get into a home, is that the school board is actually your biggest property tax levier. So ask yourself, are you getting the return on your investment? If that's the biggest check you're going to write as a taxpayer to your school board, as a homeowner, do you enjoy your kid's school?
Yeah.
Do you feel like they're safe? The sheriff is getting the next biggest check, right? Mm-hmm. Am I being properly policed? There's so many things that are connected to our taxes that we look over because of the theatrics that happens at the top. The lower elections are where we will see a paradigm shift, if we want to see it, about a democracy that is responsive to the people and our investments, which are tax dollars. They're investments. We're sitting here at NASDAQ right now trying to figure out what's our return on our investments on the things that are going up and down. There should be a ticker for the sheriff's office. There should be a ticker for the school board. There should be a ticker for all of it needs to just start going up and down.
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, local elections,
absolutely.
they matter. They matter. I mean, bigger than national, and in some cases the president, they matter. But speaking of that, I get you out of here on this because, listen, you were a former policy advisor for Donald Trump. Yep. You worked at the DNC. You worked at the RNC. You have a well-ranged understanding of how this thing goes, working on both sides of the aisle. Who wins?
Look, I have no idea who's going to win, but I'll say this. I've tried my best throughout my life to understand this language of politics. I hope I can extend what I learned from being on both sides of the aisle to translate that to businesses and enterprises and causes that can just cut through the sort of lingo that gets us divided and just get straight to the goal. If the left's got a good idea, it should be a good idea because it's a good idea.
Yeah.
Where can we have a marketplace of ideas? And that's what I hope we can get from this election. a solid marketplace of ideas so people can come vet what the ideas are, not be as concerned about who said it, but just evaluate it for what it is. Does it pencil out on paper? Does it actually make sense? Is it possible? And if it is, then let's debate that. So I hope that out of this election, the best ideas win, and who those are attached to, I couldn't tell you, my friend. I hope, at the end of the day, I just hope everybody gets out and vote.
Yeah, listen, I hope we have a Congress and Senate that can get along so we can get policies passed. That's what you hope for.
Yeah, you hope they can get along, but you also hope that there's some new blood.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, I mean, listen, that's why, one of the questions I'm going to ask you about Mitt Romney in a minute, he's stepping aside because I admire his quote, when he said, listen, it's time for a new generation to shape the world they're going to live in. Right, and so definitely need this young people to step up, go out and vote. No matter who you vote for, just definitely do it. Rapid reaction stuff, man. As we get you out of here, first million. How'd you make it? How'd you spend it? Anything you do different?
How would I do it differently?
How'd you make it first?
Stocks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was actually just personally investing.
Yeah.
I was. My friends on Law School used to call me day trader. I was locked in.
Mm-hmm.
I probably should have been paying more attention. But I was literally on my first E-Trade account. I ain't gonna say what year, how old I am, but I was at the early, man. I figured it out, was able to take the money I made from stocks and then go into business. I started my first business while I was still in law school. Built a chain of retail stores and exited there.
Nice.
While I was in law school, which I don't advise anybody to do. Just stay focused on the books. But for me, I had the entrepreneur blood. I just had to get at it.
They don't sound like you do anything different, man. Like that sounds like a nice way to make $1 million.
Right, exactly.
That doesn't sound like anything different. Well, Gen AI, artificial intelligence. When you hear the phrase, what do you think about, and what isn't being talked about?
I think AI is, we're still very limited in what we think it can do or what we're talking about anyway. One of my advisors for Ready Life is Van Jones. Van Jones always talks about this. Van and I, chat about it. He talks about his daughter, her first crush is going to be an AI generated, guy when she's a teenager. I think the AI has some ability when it comes especially to mimic what we do. To be helpful in the criminal justice area that we are talking about. I think it can be more helpful in the mental health area. I think we talk about criminal justice as a whole. I think that when we are looking at how we approach justice and how we approach rehabilitation, I think once you see AI get into a space where it can help augment human behavior, be a support system for people that need support, I think you're going to start seeing AI be the therapists that we have in 20 years are going to be artificial. That can. I mean, if Alexa's listening to us all day anyway, and Siri is listening to us right now, think of all the data that's being collected that you could put human learning algorithms around to be able to step into that space. And those are some interesting products and companies on the market that are evolving right now. Keep an eye on that are private that I want to watch and see how they take that data and build out how AI can get into these spaces where we really need help, which is the systems that touch the least, the last, and the left behind, and really try to use it in a positive way.
Yeah. All the commitments that were made, the billions and billions of dollars of announcements since George Floyd was murdered. Now you see today DEI rollbacks. You see obviously a presidential election trying to divide families and all of that. When you look at what's going on today as far as the promises that were made to the black community, what do you see?
I wish I saw more.
Yeah.
I think that I made a commitment to myself, and a lot of other people in my circle made a commitment to ourselves to not complain about it, to just try to make the most of it. I think what you see with redemption, for a lot of us that have invested our time and talent into this effort to acquire this bank, it was primarily because we all knew after George Floyd that there would be a day
it was going to stop.
That it would stop.
Yeah.
That the cause for black lives in America will always be as popular as our last martyr.
Yeah.
And when that martyr loses popularity, our cause does. So we have to figure out how do we build institutions that can outlast that popularity.
Right.
And when we look at the fundamental institutions to a nation that is capitalist, banking is one of them. So we hope and we aspire to get this banking transaction done so when we look back 50 years from now, and that question is asked again, that we can say that for a system that it has no grace and mercy for African Americans from its outset, in a world where we were told that capitalism was the name of the game, but we were people that were capital, and we're told to become capitalists. And along that journey, at some point, we found grace and mercy, because that is what redemption is. Redemption is grace and mercy. This is why we're building a bank in a way that we hope can be a symbol of extending grace and mercy to a people in a system that have never had it, but do so in a way that can be celebrated by all walks of life, a place where we can all come together, pull our talents, pull our resources and our wealth to have an impact on this world. And you can't do that unless you start with a recognition that whether it was right after George Floyd, it was right after Trayvon, it was right after the assassinations of the great martyrs of the past, every time we've seen this happen. But we have to start building blocks to build a foundation on it. We think banking is one of them. Our education, HBCUs are one of them. Our healthcare system is one of them. You gotta have those three things. If you're not healthy, you can educate yourself and have a place to move your wealth, then you don't have a society, you don't have a community. This piece is critical. And we think that redemption can be a part of that.
Yeah, most definitely, man. Well, I'll get you out of here on this, right? Because banking is in your blood, right? And you're in it now. You know, kind of piggybacking off of, you know, Jim Collins' Good to Great book. What's the difference between a good bank and a great one?
I think, you know, a bank is, unfortunately, a lot of people tell me this, brothers tell me this all the time, well, actually, the bank's the bank. What are you doing different?
Yeah.
You know, I think first off, with any organization, the people matter. I think that there's good people at that bank now. I think there'll be good people that we'll bring in. But what I think could make a bank great is to not be afraid to do things a little differently with people you don't normally do them with. Just to be honest with you. What makes us great is the fact that we're a small bank. What will make us great is the fact that we're a small concern, but we aren't afraid to go knocking on the doors of National Football League, the NBA, and saying we can do a deal, same deal that Goldman can do. Mm-hmm. And that's what we showed with the Black Bank Syndication Desk. The NFL, Major League Soccer does a deal with JP Morgan all the time. They recapitalize themselves with JP Morgan. They did the same deal with 11 black banks. That's what I want to be able to show, not just about redemption, but about the collective power of all of the black banks. The fact that we did the exact same deal that Goldman Sachs could have done, that JP Morgan could have done, that's what makes a great bank, especially a minority bank, is when we can elevate ourselves out of just doing car loans, just small business loans. Yeah. But I can be sitting here with you. The end of the day, 5 years from now, we will talk again, whether it's outside on the street or you in a bigger space. But when we are looking behind me and you see redemption's ticker, and you see that number going up, and when somebody asks, how are the hopes and aspirations doing on Wall Street? And we're talking about Wall Street, we're not far from it. We need real estate on Wall Street. We need to own real estate on Wall Street. So a great bank in the black community, any other community, is somewhere that you can look and see the national impact of what you're doing. So good is local. Great would be national.
Yeah, and I hope the next time we talk, man, it's at the bank talking $1 million loan or something, man.
Come see me. Come see me.
Ashley Bell, I appreciate all the time, my brother. Good luck. I know there's a lot of hurdles that you still got to go through for the deal to be complete in Utah. Ready Life, right? You know, fintech is a great space, I believe. So good luck, man. I hope that this bank expands. I want to put my money there. I wanted to be there, man.
We love to have you. At the end of the day, if we...
I just don't want to move to Salt Lake. That's it.
Get your ski gear together, brother. Let's hit the slopes.
Absolutely. Ashley Bell here at the NASDAQ. Jabari Young, thank you for watching.
When we started, we said, who are we? And what do we believe we're good at? We've done a bit of real estate investing, but our real strength, our real forte was as business owners. So we said, we're going to focus on apartments because they act like an operating business. We were going to pay absolutely no attention to what the industry was doing. You know, people talk about, well, I tore up the rule book. We never actually even picked the rule book up. And so we built all of our own systems, processes, strategies, and beliefs. We quickly found out that what we were doing was radically different than the industry. Well, I'm Larry Connor, and I'm the managing partner of the Connor Group.
Larry Connor is a real estate investor based in Dayton, Ohio. His transactional approach to real estate investing at his firm, the Connor Group, has made him a billionaire, worth an estimated $2 billion. A self-described C student in high school, Connor went on to become an entrepreneur who built one of the best performing real estate funds in the country.
There are certain personality traits that are common to most entrepreneurs. I mean, you gotta have what we call grit, passion and perseverance. Some people wear the moniker of entrepreneur, but they're not. They're people like wannabe entrepreneurs. To be a real entrepreneur is exceptionally hard to do.
The son of a World War II vet father and a Red Cross volunteer mother, he went to high school in Dayton and graduated with a 2.0 GPA, painting houses on the side with a friend. After graduation, he started buying used cars and packing them with damaged label wines in Dayton, selling them on for a profit to college students in Athens, where he attended Ohio University. On weekends, he'd pick up dead bodies and bring them to a local funeral home for $5 a piece. After school came a sales gig at a Volkswagen dealership, followed by a stint as a travel advisor, which took him to Morocco, Mexico, and Europe.
I had an opportunity to be exposed to a lot of, I guess today what you call C-level executives, and you kind of got to see both sides. Some immensely talented, and other people that I wondered how they ever got in that position.
And then, by the time he was 27, he went back to Dayton to start his own business.
Here in Dayton, there was a new historical district called the Oregon District. And I and a partner thought that we could start a bar restaurant. And so we took an old movie theater, converted it. By the way, we had no money and no experience. And we went out and got 21 investors. We raised a grand total of $52,500. We started it called Newcomb's Tavern. It was phenomenally successful. We sold it 2 years later, and the investors got a 300% return.
He took the proceeds and bought and sold homes in Dayton. Then, in the 1980s, he moved to Orlando, setting up a company that reportedly was once the second largest reseller of IBM microcomputers in Florida. But the success didn't last, and the firm shut its doors in 1990.
I'm age 40, I'm broke. I have a wife, 2 kids, and a farm. Actually, the problem is I'm worse than broke, because I had borrowed $900,000 on what they call signature loans. Well, even though I was broke, I was bound and determined I was going to pay every dime back. I just thought that was the right thing to do. If you said, did you have a plan? No, but I had a commitment to do it anyway. 3 years later, through a lot of hard work, dedication, and a bit of luck, I ended up paying back every one of the lenders.
He turned again to real estate, recruiting 2 partners and a single investor to form the Connor, Murphy, and Berman Group, which invested in apartment buildings.
There were 3 apartment communities in Dayton that had gone back to this Kansas City savings and loan through a foreclosure. We started negotiating with them. It went on for, I don't remember, 6 months. We were getting ready to close. We called them on a Friday. The government had come in that morning and seized the S&L. We were back to ground zero, starting over. That's not good when you're trying to do your first acquisitions. We just didn't know how to quit. So literally, almost a year after that, to the day, we bought those 3 apartment communities, and we actually bought them at $1 million less than we had agreed to pay, yet the operations had improved. And so that was the launching pad, and those 3 apartment communities turned out to be huge successes.
10 years later, he bought out his partners and took over the firm. Connor seeks quick returns in an illiquid market, trying to profitably sell properties as quickly as possible, constantly analyzing each one to juice income and minimize costs. On average, the firm keeps a property for 5.5 years.
You've got to be willing to take calculated risk, not stupid risk. You got to be an achiever, but you also have to have some understanding and appreciation that people really matter and that you can't do it alone and that you got to build, the right group of people. We tried to hire some people from the industry in the first 2 years. It never worked out. So by strategy, we built a business all with people who've never done it before. And it was one of the smartest things we did, because we're not encumbered by industry or conventional thinking.
The Connor Group currently owns and operates a $5 billion portfolio of 51 apartment buildings across 12 states, from Colorado to Florida. Since it was founded in 1991, its investments in luxury apartments have generated an annual rate of return of 30.4%. Many of those buildings were sold less than 3 years after they were acquired, with returns ranging from 17 to 159%. That risk isn't limited to his investments. Connor's personal adventures include skydiving out of an air balloon at a record-breaking 38,139 feet, a pioneering plunge to the bottom of the Mariana Trench at 35,856 feet below sea level, and a mission to the International Space Station as one of the world's first private astronauts.
There's never been a private crew that's ever gone to the International Space Station. We were the first. The 10 months of almost full-time training, extremely difficult and humbling. Because keep in mind, all the NASA astronauts, mega talented, all have advanced STEM degrees. I have none of the above. We did not good, but groundbreaking research across 25 plus different experiments. There have been few weeks in the history of the International Space Station that much research was conducted in that compressed period of time. So, immensely proud of the AX-1 team. Yes, I would go again. Yes, I may go again.
His ambition extends to philanthropy as well.
There's huge turmoil in March of 2020. We thought, for a multitude of reasons, we had both the obligation and the opportunity to stay engaged, to keep operating, but with that became a huge responsibility to take not good but phenomenal care of the people who are going to get us there, which is all the associates, especially the people at the front lines.
Early in the pandemic in 2020, Connor invested in a handful of stocks and the investment gained $1.6 million in 10 days.
I felt great, but a little bit wrong about, hey, it's great you did that, but you know, look at all these other people who are out there suffering or working or things like that. So I called then the director of communications, Ryan Ernst.
I was leaving the office and he called. And I picked up and I said, what's going on? And he said, you know how I had recently made some of those trades that we had talked about on the stock market and made that money, 1.6 million. He said, what would you think if we just gave it to all like frontline workers?
Any employee who does two things, works here for the next 6 months and does a good job on their job, we're gonna take that 1.6 million and spread it out over roughly, I think, 400 associates we had at the time.
And I said, you know, this is why I love working here, because you do crazy shit like this. I think that you should sleep on it and let's talk in the morning. But I love the idea.
In April of 2020, Larry broadcasted a video message to his employees to share the news.
I'm taking the entire 1.6 million and dividing up amongst all of you.
Why?
In my view, this is not a gift. You've earned it.
Oh my God.
So again, I want to thank each and every one of you for staying in the game and doing your part.
It really showed he put his money where his mouth is. Like, people count, and I don't think he could have picked a better way to show us how we counted. Like, it's not everything, but just that gesture, like, it meant a lot, especially during that time for a lot of people.
People were wildly appreciative. People did a phenomenal job, and so in my mind, you just invested in the most important thing you can invest in, and that's in people.
The Connor Group has a nonprofit arm called Kids and Community Partners, which includes the Greater Dayton School. And it recently opened the doors of its new location in Dayton.
It takes a tremendous amount of people to try to do the impossible, which is what we're trying to do here. And so the hope is, and the belief is that we can build a revolutionary model that can transform kids lives. Kids who are under-resourced, we believe that if we equip these kids, not only academics, but the total person, what we call all the wraparound services, that these kids can do as well, if not better, than any other child from any other environment.
We know from research that if you're able to teach individually and at a child's own pace, they can grow from the 10th percentile to the 76th percentile in 1 year, which is unheard of. We saw upwards of 20% growth in our students because we teach this way. It's not easy, but it's super impactful. And that's just on the academic side. We had last year 96% of our kids pass the presidential fitness test, and that's super important to us. We had 98% of our kids get preventative care, so their annual doctor's visits, 2 dental cleanings. It's unlike anything that I could have imagined that I would have as a principal in terms of the resources that we could provide our students.
Our gut is telling us that this thing works, and the early data is telling us that this thing works. We really started looking at it more like nonprofit activist investing as opposed to philanthropy or charity or just writing checks. How are we really going to make a difference and help pull people out of generational poverty?
I've seen kids in the public school system slip through the cracks because of the lack of resources that our country provides kids from under-resourced areas. To have the resources to really give our students what they deserve, what every kid deserves, it hits home.
It's great that we did this in Dayton, Ohio, but it's just one city. This is a national crisis, but also a national opportunity that it would be a shame we didn't take advantage of it. The kids are our future of America. We need to give them the opportunities, right?
No matter what is involved in, Connor runs a tight ship. At the Connor Group, every employee is rated on a 10-point scale, where a 7 equates to a C grade.
The reality is, this place is not for most people, but it's a phenomenal place for the right person.
I tell people all the time, he's not an easy person to work for, but it's never not interesting. And he really, at his core, likes to help people. I mean, he really, really does. His baseline motivation for doing this stuff is not headlines, it's not financially driven. I mean, there's so many things that he does for people that never make it out of this building or that never make it out of his office that he just enjoys doing.
There's a much higher standard than being financially successful, period. Everybody knows what the right thing is. Some people just choose not to follow it. Well, that doesn't work for us. And we don't care who you are. To us, it's never been about sizing. It's always been about excellence. We will sacrifice sizing, success, financial gain for excellence.
Sheila Johnson, thank you for coming to the 3050 Summit.
This is just such an honor. You have no idea.
The honor is ours. You have so many titles to your name. You are a founder, you are a musician, a philanthropist, the owner of sports teams, to a degree that no other Black woman in the U.S. has reached. You also wrote a book in which you write about your life and you write about your philosophy of running businesses. And one of the things that really stood out to me was your entrepreneurial instincts were there even in your 20s, well before you reached where you are now. Yes. How do you think you honed those business instincts?
I think it's really believing in people. So many people, it's really funny because I was visiting with Kara Swisher, who has her book that just came out, and she was talking about how entrepreneurs start out and then suddenly they become successful, very successful, and they go from the Levi set to the cashmere set. And they just kind of lose touch with people. And I think one of the things I know, because I really do believe in people and really trying to bring people along. You know, and it's all about leadership. You can lead any company, but what kind of leader are you really going to be? Are you going to be an empathetic leader or a mentoring type leader? Domineering leader? I like to be a leader that really inspires my employees. And I've mentioned this before, I could call it HARP. It's about being honest, authentic, respectful, and passionate. And to be able to clearly be able to communicate to my employees my vision of how I want to grow my company. And I have to teach them and work with them on how to buy into that. And you have to be very careful with whom you hire, because if they come in with their own agenda, you don't want to keep them. They need to buy into the vision and into the teamwork and be able to work as a team to help you build your company.
And you've had experience with people who had their own agenda.
Oh, yes.
Early days of one company, you even caught someone stealing.
Yes. So the philosophy there is you hire slowly and you fire fast.
Hire slowly, fire fast.
Yes.
That's good advice. You've also shown the ability to have a remarkable commitment to the long-term vision, while other people might be tempted for the short term, optimizing for the short term. You write about the BET IPO and what some people, and like your co-founder, wanted to do with the company.
Right.
And you had a different vision. How did you manage to stick to that vision and convince others that what you wanted to do was the right path?
Well, I'm not sure if I was able during that time to convince them. I just knew what I needed to do and the value system that needed to be built within the company. Some people didn't believe in it. My co-founder didn't believe in it. And it was a case where even when you're doing an IPO, because our IPO didn't last very long, there was not enough patience to really understand how to grow the company and have the patience to make it work. There are too many people that are always interested in the bottom line and how they're going to make money fast. And when you do that, that money doesn't last very long. So you've got to be very strategic on how you want to grow the company. And there were just so many mistakes that I could see that were happening, like not really identifying the ages that we really wanted to strategically hit with our programming. So our programming never could grow. And because of that, we got into the video market way too fast because MTV did not want to promote black videos at all. That was a door that opened. That was great. But let's stick to the value system. I didn't like what I was seeing on the screen. And that's when I then decided to do a show called Teen Summit to really teach young people about smart TV watching. And that's what was really important to me.
You were overlooked and discounted and ignored as a co-founder of BET for so long. But then in your third act, you've come into your own as an entrepreneur. You have such a successful hotel line property.
Yeah.
How have you been able to overcome those days of being overlooked?
I think it was a case with the help of therapy and my mother, where they reminded me that I did have what it would take to build another company. I think when you're in an abusive relationship, you have no idea how you lose sense of yourself. And I was losing sense of myself. And I didn't have the security within myself to even think about what I needed to do. I lost belief in myself. I didn't know who I was. And then slowly, once I got out of a toxic relationship, I was then able to rebuild my life. And it took time and lots of help from a good doctor, and was able to then really strategically put together a path in which I needed to start going on. And when I decided, I've had no intentions of going in the hotel business, and I knew nothing about it. But what I did know, what I had to do, if that was what I was going to do, I needed to hire the smartest people out there. And they had to be smarter than me. And I was going to learn from them. And the fine line that and I still every day work on this, the fine line is you hire smarter people, but you don't want them to overtake you and take you for granted You know what I'm saying?
I was going to ask you that. It's a tricky balance.
It's a very tricky balance. And I think part of it is I had the power of finance, which they did not have. And also, I was able to communicate my vision. And they really bought into my vision. And because of that, we're probably one of the most successful luxury hotel companies out there. Mm-hmm. We're recognized by Forbes. We won this award last week. Our hotel in Middleburg is one of 13 in the world to receive 15 stars. And all of our other hotels are Forbes 4 stars. So as I told the company, I said, okay, don't sit back on your laurels. We have got to keep those 15 stars, and we've got to work on the rest of the resorts to get the 5 stars. So we are very wedded to Forbes, to the training. I've actually sat in on the training myself to understand what it takes to get the Forbes awards. And that's important. I was learning the whole time, but still able to communicate what I wanted. And I knew my design. I knew exactly what I want the hotels to look like. I picked the furniture out. I've designed linens. I do all of that, but that's all from my arts background. So all of that has built in to where my vision takes me.
There are so many details in the book that illustrate the ways in which you've invested in yourself. And this is a small detail relative to the other important lessons, but you used your own art collection to decorate your property.
Oh, yes.
And I just thought that was so fitting. It felt so full circle because these were pieces you had invested in with a property that you had to fight the local municipality, you had to negotiate, you had to be strategic. And then when it came time to decorate it, you were looking at your own art collection.
Yes, and there were times when I, wanted to cut the budget a little bit. So I did all my own photography. The photography's in all of the rooms. And as you get off the elevators, there's my work there. So I've done even my own personal work. And I designed the linens. And I made the mistake. They were all coming out of Italy. And I said, I can't keep this up. I got to go on a cheaper route. But the same design is still in the linen. It's just that I use another manufacturer.
Do guests realize that it's your photography?
Oh, they know.
Oh, they know.
Because I sign it.
Okay. You are proud of your name.
Yes.
As you should.
Absolutely.
I love sports, and I've mentioned this to you multiple times, but I think the fact that you own stakes in 3 professional sports leagues in the U.S. is remarkable. Quite literally, there is no other Black woman who can say the same. Can you talk about how it was that you came to do that and why it was important for you to get involved in this arena? Because you could have stuck to the arts.
I know. I think this is kind of serendipitous in the sense that I became friends with the original owner of the Capitals and the Wizards and the Mystics. I was always friends and respected this man, and it's all in the book.
Yeah, you got an interesting call from your ex saying, don't do this to me.
Don't do this to me, because he wanted to own the teams. So what had happened, he really disrespected Abe Pollin. Abe Pollin was very gracious. He never reacted, but he never forgot. So one day he called me and he says, I want you to be the face of the Washington Mystics. And I said, what do you mean by being the face of? He says, I'd like you to own it. I said, but the Mystics doesn't make money. And he said, but look, I'm giving you an opportunity. And I said, I'm not turning it down. Give me the financials. He says, please make up your mind soon. I then called my lawyer and I said, I've just been offered a sports team. And he says, you should not buy a sports team. I said, if you were in that position and if you were offered a sports team, what would you do? And he got very quiet. I said, you just answered my question. I said, now I want you to get Ted Leonsis on the phone, and I have the money. I want to buy into the Wizards, the basketball NBA team, and the hockey team. And I want to be a really substantial partner. And so I was able to do that. And eventually Ted named me vice chairman of Monumental Sports. He's chairman, I'm vice chairman. And I've been a very active partner. and reaching out into the community and really helping that franchise be successful. You know, I mean, we won a Stanley Cup and my women won the national title. So
you have a pretty good track record.
Pretty good, yeah. Now we're in a rebuilding process. Whenever you win titles, it's a refresher course again.
As a Philadelphia Eagles fan, I know this entirely too well.
Oh, yeah.
But what I wanted to come back to is a theme that I've noticed in the way that you talk about your business decisions and your personal real estate decisions is you seem unafraid to say, that's not the right value, I want this. Or that can't make money, but this can, and I want that. I will speak for myself. That's something I have trouble doing. I think a lot of women can struggle with being very open about financial decisions and financial moves. And I know you've also been involved through your philanthropy with girls' economic empowerment. So we could probably have a 5-hour conversation about how to empower women economically. But what do you tell to women and girls around the world about better optimizing their own financial power?
First of all, you really have to get out in the world and understand the way the world's working. If you're not worldly in the sense and you're watching other deals going down and what's worked, what's not worked, there's more startup companies, even in the tech industry, that fail immediately. You need to hone your instincts. And not only that, just don't keep it to yourself, but you bring advisors in. And they will school you, whether it's smart or it's not smart. And sometimes I will do things and I will say, I know this is going to work. And there have been a couple of investments I'm like, I should have done it. Like there's this company, Steinbridge, that this woman started. And she asked me to invest in it, and people told me not to do it. And I'm really, to this day, I regret it. And I use her all the time. I just think it's one of the most brilliant companies that she's been able to start. You have to really keep your eyes and your ears open. And I'll tell you a story. I was in the owner's box and I hear my partners and they're talking to each other about investments. And there was this one investment that one of the partners wanted to start. And he says, I've gotten X number of thousands of dollars from Michael Jordan, and they're naming these names. And I'm more like, well, if they're going to invest in that, why couldn't I? And I said, wait a minute, what are you all talking about? And they said, what are you talking? I said, I'm listening to you, and I want to be in this conversation, and I would like to invest. Well, you know, it may be closing. I said, no, open it back up. I want to invest in it. And to this day, I'm an investor in this company. But you have to have, what is it, the perseverance?
The gumption.
The gumption. You need to get in there and express your feelings.
You need to say, I want to be in this conversation.
And it's the way you communicate that with strength and confidence. And it'll say, I want to really, no, I want to be in there with you.
I hope we hear more women say that. It's hard, though. It's hard when the boys do the boy thing and go off in a group, and we don't have enough women in these spaces.
Yeah, you know, it's really interesting. The students that I put through school, especially through the Kennedy School, when they graduated, I gave them all a set of golf clubs. And they're like, why? I said, because there's more decisions made on the golf course than any other place. And so they've all learning to play golf, and they're going out there to play with their...
In 2023, mortgage rates spiked to levels not seen since 2008. And despite coming down in recent months, remain higher than they've been in more than 2 decades. Home prices have also skyrocketed, up 30% nationally on average over the past 4 years, while real median household income has stagnated. Yet given a nationwide shortage of at least 4 million housing units, according to the National Association of Realtors, it's a great time to be a home builder.
The health of the home building industry right now is probably as good as I've seen it in my 19 years of doing this. We are benefiting, and people who are homeowners in this country right now are benefiting from one of the biggest population shifts that we've seen in a very long time. I think there's like 9 million more millennials than there were Gen Xers. And then you add on the Gen Zs right there in the mix too, which I think the leading edge of Gen Z is like 27, 28 right now. So you have this amazing amount of demand for housing, and we just can't build them. The industry can't build them fast enough to meet the demand that's out there.
This housing dilemma has allowed for smaller builders to thrive. Tom Bradbury is the executive chairman of the board of Smith Douglas Homes, based in Woodstock, Georgia, a company that since 2008 has built 304 communities in 5 states and whose sales hit $765 million in 2023. Shares of Smith Douglas, which Bradbury took public on the New York Stock Exchange in January, are up 56% since then. The 80-year-old Bradbury, who still owns 88% of the stock, is now a billionaire.
The first job I had was selling airplanes. And I did well at that. In 1969, interest rates went up and it just stopped. So I said, well, I'm gonna get in something stable like real estate.
After selling his first house in 1975, Bradbury started Atlanta-based Colony Homes.
I asked my dad, the first house I built, I said, Daddy, can you give me advice? And he said, son, if you'll watch the pennies, the dollars will take care of themselves. And even today, we have, every month, closing 250 houses a month or so, we'll have 1 or 2 houses that cost to the penny what we said it would cost. And no other home builder has those strict controls.
Well, Tom and I met in the late 80s. I went to work with Tom, and at that time, Tom was still overseeing all of the development activity and the development crews. You know, I just got to hear him live out loud that never give up, never quit. We can find a way always to get things done.
As Colony Homes evolved, Bradbury took an interest in construction software.
I started going to a seminar in Denver, Colorado. Lee Evans, who was at the time was the dean of the building construction degree program at the University of Denver. The first meeting I went to, Lee was right in the process of the early stages of working with a programming company to computerize the home building process. I bought that software, during that meeting, and over the next year implemented, which gave me the ability to grow the business and still maintain the strict controls that we have today.
Bradbury held on to Colony Homes for almost 3 decades before selling the company to KB Home in 2003 for $67 million.
When Colony sold to KB, I really was pushing them to use the software because it was by far superior to what they had. But I had in the definitive agreement with KB that if they didn't use it, that I would get the software back.
5 years later, when KB Home pulled out of Atlanta, Bradbury, who was frustrated they'd abandoned the market, started Smith Douglas Homes.
Tom and I maintained a very close relationship, through that time, but it was Tom's persistence more than anything else that brought me back.
Since then, Smith Douglas has built 15,000 homes, mostly for lower to middle class buyers like auto workers, teachers, and first responders, mainly in growth markets in the South, such as Nashville, Charlotte, and Raleigh.
If you think about what differentiates Smith Douglas from their competitors and some of the other builders, public builders as well, I think it's being able to give people a home that's priced at or below the FHA limit and give them some optionality in the home.
In July 2024, Forbes had the opportunity to visit Smith Douglas's build site in Cartersville, Georgia.
How long does it typically take to build these sort of communities that we're in? I'm seeing probably close to 50 houses right now, but how long does it take to build out these communities?
Well, the length of time to build a community out depends on how large it is.
Yeah.
But our average cycle time across the footprint is 59 days. Mm-hmm. And we've got a goal to get that back down to 47 days. And Greg and I were in the home building business earlier. We sold a company called Colony Homes in 2003. And at that time, our cycle time was 46 days, which is unheard of in the industry.
Right.
And that's how we get, you know, the contractor's overhead is the same no matter how much volume they do. So the more houses that they can do in a given period of time, the more profitable they are.
Right.
And as a result, we are too. So we get good pricing from our trades, and we take good care of them. My passion is to get people in a home that otherwise can't do it. And it's been tough because since the pandemic, our costs have gone up 30%, but yet still, we are the low-cost, quality provider of housing with choice.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed learning about Smith Douglas, learning about the software behind the Smith Douglas, what they call the R team and the smart build strategy. It's, I think, definitely a novel concept among what I've seen from the other public home builders.
We own the software and we can tailor it to do exactly what we wanted to do. We have programmers in-house that can update it and make changes as we see fit. It's real-time data. It doesn't require an integration in the middle of the night or once a week. If there's a change made to the schedule right now, us as well as our trade partners can see it within a second. It's all real time. Everybody sees the exact same set of data.
There are competing software packages out there that have some of the collaboration, but not an end-to-end collaboration like Smith Douglas. That is the reason that they get these houses built faster than most of their competitors.
In 2019, Greg Bennett was promoted from Chief Operating Officer to President and CEO of Smith Douglas Homes.
Closing in on 50 years I've been in business, I know most of the operators. I've seen them. I know what tools they have. I can tell you Greg Bennett is the best operator in the space.
We would like to have larger share in each of the markets we're in, but we want to do that in a manner that we grow efficiencies at the same time.
That slower growth has allowed them to maintain a balance sheet that has more cash than it does debt. And they've been very, very prudent and I would say very careful in their use of debt as they've grown the business organically.
We want to be the most efficient, the most operational excellent company, not necessarily the biggest company out there.
As long as the builders like Smith Douglas can find ways to make these homes affordable, we think the demand trends for the next, call it 5 to 7 years, look pretty solid for this group.
We never rest on our morals. We are always looking for what's better. Okay, yeah, we're here, but there's a way to get better. And we're constantly, pushing that envelope to improve.
If you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. But if you do know where you're going and you just show up every day and you look at every obstacle that comes your way as an opportunity and trick yourself into thinking you're having fun, you're going to get there.
Have a seat. All right. Did we already scare away half the audience?
No, they're up there. I can see everyone up there. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for joining us. As the voice in the air said, I'm Mike Federley, the CEO of Forbes, and I've known this guy for 12 years now, and I call him maybe the poster boy of the under 30. That in 2015 he made our list. 9 years later, we said he's a billionaire. So easy peasy, right? Like it happens that way. And it can happen to anyone out there in the audience. But I'm sure, Ankur, that it's not quite that easy. So why don't we start by kind of give the crowd a little bit about your journey?
Can I maybe, because this is how embarrassing it is coming here 9 years later, as I'm now the old guy in the room.
Well, I'm a little older, but go ahead.
But I remember coming to these events when I was 24, 25, and it was so much fun, mostly because everyone in the group, we're friends, right? You're all coming out of school, and that's the best part about starting something big or working on new ideas under 30, is that you have this community of people like you who didn't choose to do the banking job, the consulting job. And, when I graduated college in 2011, there was still an element of being an entrepreneur wasn't cool yet. And I blame this on you.
We like to think we made it cool, right?
But you've got this amazing community of people, and I think I will tell you 9 years later, even, from the first 30 under 30 list that I did with you guys, many of the people that I met here, many of the people who were on the list that same year, we're all still super close friends and do everything together. And so I say that because you cannot underestimate how valuable it is to have people like all of you who can go through these ups and downs together, because it is so freaking hard. And the cool thing is you do wake up now, like 9 years later, and the nice thing is everyone running everything is now your friends from this event, right? And that's it makes things a little bit easier.
Well, that's great, because Randall was talking about that for those who were in the audience at the beginning, how there's going to be some couple gets married here, evidently. But beyond that, it's about making sure that you make those connections here, because they can help as each individual goes through their own journey. You were once named, I think by Inc. magazine, as the most networked 21-year-old in the world. And I can attest that you're pretty well networked, the people you know. How do you build a network like that? What tips might you give people out in the audience?
Okay, I'm going to spend 30 seconds on that, and then we'll spend some other stuff. But I do think, look, I'll put it this way. There's nothing worse than networking. Let's start there.
The word networking.
And there's no one who likes sitting in a room, having to trade business cards and talk. It's like small talk nightmare from hell. So we'll start there, right? I do think what happens, though, is when you're in a room like this, and you have people who are authentically passionate about different problems, you start to attract people who are also passionate about those problems. And so the difference between building relationships and, quote, networking, in my opinion, is if you have a platform that you've created for yourself and you're genuinely intellectually curious, which you all are because you showed up here, right? You're going to find other people like you, right? And there is a certain type of crazy person who tries to do the things that we all do, right? Because if you objectively look at it, it is easier and safer to go out of school and take the consulting and banking job. You get paid more, you have less stress, right? But somehow we all wake up and we're all delusional enough to try to take on these huge problems in the world with very little certainty of success. I mean, my first startup was a failure, right? With a lot of, candidly, doing it alone. I mean, even if you have the best co-founders, you know what they say, success has 1,000 co-founders, failure has one. Right? It is crazy how difficult the roller coaster is, and you find yourself attracted to people like you, and that becomes the network of the relationships. And so just by definition, if you're in the room with a platform with a lot of successful people, chances are you're going to share that passion.
Yeah, no, that's terrific. But so you mentioned, as I said, the way on paper it looks like you've had nothing but blue sky success, right? You went from being nominated in 2015 to being a billionaire 9 years later. But I know along the way there was Kairos, there was Human, there was Rhino.
I mean, you have to get, first of all, so...
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'll start with the following. So I think, how many people here are trying to start companies? Just so I get a quick reference check. Okay, good. Mostly still entrepreneurs. I love that. So I think one of the biggest problems that has happened in starting a company is business school grads started thinking it was cool to be an entrepreneur. Business school is the single worst thing that has happened to entrepreneurship, because it went from how do you solve a big problem to how do I create a market size opportunity matrix, which is just total bullshit, right? And no matter what you think your idea is, it is going to change 15 times. The problem that you're solving doesn't change, right? And so if you look at the lessons I've learned over the different startups, like my first startup out of college was a company called Human. It is appropriately forgotten because it didn't work, right? But that led me accidentally to running product for Tinder, which I could barely figure out my own dating life, and somehow I was running this thing.
We'll get to that later.
And then from there, it was 2017. We sold Tinder and Match off fully. It was a $3 billion kind of acquisition there. And I remember I was in San Francisco, and I was getting pitched by this venture capitalist, and I'll remind me to come back to venture capitalists, because not a huge fan.
I'm looking up at the sponsors. We don't have any universities, MBA programs, or venture capitalists. So
Good start. So I remember I was sitting in a room, and this venture capitalist came and pitched me. He goes, I've got this idea that's going to change the world. You should really think about coming to run it. We're going to put in $100 million into it. And so I was so excited to hear about this breakthrough idea. And he proceeds to pitch me CryptoKitties. I mean, this guy literally goes, imagine if you had digital blah, 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 blah on the blockchain. NFT. I was like, I remember so frustrated. I walked out of that room. And for those of you all been to San Francisco? Anybody? There's Market Street on San Francisco. This is 2017. This was like the rise of bird scooters had just raised like $2 billion. Like NFTs were popping off everywhere. And in the middle of Market Street, there was a homeless person naked humping a scooter while Teslas were stopped. And I'm thinking to myself, this is the problem with what's happened in Silicon Valley and entrepreneurship, is that people, in your own backyard, you have the worst healthcare crisis. You have a huge problem with access to housing. People don't have access to financial services. These are trillion-dollar markets. And yet, everybody wanted to be a startup founder doing NFTs. Like, that is the problem, right? And so I think if you go back and you remember, why are you starting a company in the first place, right? And if you can say, this is the problem that I care a lot about. Here's how I think I'm going to solve it. Now, envision that solution, sleep on it, and ask yourself the next day, can you live in a world where that problem has not yet been solved? And if the answer is yes, then don't waste your time doing the startup, right? But if it gnats at you every single minute after that, then maybe you'll be able to persist through the ups and downs to figure it out.
So what was it, though? Because all of the ideas that I think you had were good ones. They sounded legitimate. They sounded like they could grow. When did you realize that Bilt was different? We haven't talked about Bilt yet, so give a quick Bilt.
Quick background on Bilt. People here rent? Yeah? Okay. See, people, 4 years ago, no one would cheer for having to pay rent. And you probably still shouldn't cheer for having to pay rent. But rent is the biggest expense for most people in this country, right? And I remember looking at this, I was 27 at the time we started working on this, and saying, how is it that we all pay rent every single month on time? 40% of our average income goes to rent every single month. And after 5 years, you have nothing to show on your credit history for it. You're no closer to home ownership. And like, I can buy a round of drinks and get airline miles, and I pay my rent on time, and I get nothing. It's crazy, right? And so we had this really simple idea of, hey, paying rent, your biggest expense, should probably be your most rewarding expense, right? If you pay your rent on time for 5 years, and then you go to buy a home, they shouldn't be like, sorry, you don't have any credit history to buy a home. Like, that's insane. If you pay rent on time, you should get airline miles and hotel points. Like, I get it for everything else, right? I mean, I could fly around the world for free constantly if I could get points on my rent, right? And if you pay your rent on time, you should be closer to buying a home. Whether or not you want to buy a home is your decision, but you should have the ability, right? Now, I thought that was a simple idea. So I first went to started pitching a bunch of real estate owners, and this is 2018 now. And it was the worst. And for those of you who are founders, you'll probably hopefully relate to this. Everybody would tell me what a great idea it was, but it's probably not the right thing for them. Right? It's a great idea. Come back to me when you get other people on board, or keep me posted. Or every venture capitalist would give you some like 15-point reason for why it won't work. But of course, if I told them that somebody else gave me a term sheet, they all race to give you a term sheet. Right? This is the problem. And so the best thing we did was we identified the problem, and we said that we were going to self-finance through partners, family, and friends for as long as we possibly could. Right? Because that stage between starting a company and getting product market fit, if you make the mistake of taking venture money at that stage, you enter the rat race way too early. Because now you have to show growth. And if you don't show growth, you can't raise a round at a higher price. And if you can't raise a round at a higher price, you're signaling to the market your startup's not working, and the next investor won't come. And the next thing you know, you're out of cash and you have to shut down. Right? And yet everybody's first thing is, I want to start a company, I got to go pitch venture capital. It makes no sense. Right? The best investors, it's all perfect alignment of incentives. The best investors are the ones who are commercially aligned with you. Right? That's why I loved Kickstarter back in the day. If you're building a consumer product, raise money from your customers. If you're building things that need real estate partners like we did, convince them to invest so their incentives are aligned with your success. Right? If you want partners in the business, don't ask them to be mentors or advisors. Ask them to invest in you, right? So that your incentives are aligned. Bring on those people as partners in the business. And so we did. And every single 6 months since we started the company, we've had a world-ending problem that we've had to deal with. I mean, it's just like the ups and the downs and the ups and the downs. 6 months into starting this company, I don't know if you remember this. I was calling you actually at the time too. 6 months into starting the company, we thought paying your rent should give you airline miles and hotel points and help you save up to put points towards a down payment on a home. Yep. Super simple idea. Our lawyers called us 6 months into the business and were like, I have good news, bad news. Good news is we love your idea. Bad news is it's not clear that the regulations allow to use points for a down payment, so you should probably pivot. It's a pretty shitty feeling.
Yeah, well, that comes with the territory though, right?
And so we had two choices. It was, do we pivot, or do we believe that the core problem of renting as a path to home ownership is big enough? And we spent 18 months in Washington, D.C. because we hadn't taken venture money. So I wasn't in a rush to force a product out like I was with my first company, right? I wasn't in a rush to show fake growth numbers because everyone loves to put out these numbers that no way you can sustain them. But venture capitalists want to see those numbers. Otherwise they say they won't give you money. It's this really terrible system. And so we spent 18 months fighting to get this thing approved. And in October 2019, we got Fannie, Freddie, and FHA to agree that paying your rent will now qualify people in this country for a home mortgage, and paying your rent can earn you points that you can use to cover a down payment. That's cool, right? Today, it took us 4 years to launch. That's unacceptable by VC standards. Right?
No, it's interesting. I've heard that from a lot of entrepreneurs that the first thing they're supposed to do is go raise VC money, and then they're validated. And I've heard also from yourself in particular that that can be the worst thing for a company. So that's interesting stuff.
Really, it's not that they're bad people. It's perfectly aligned incentives. If you're an early stage fund, you want to drive valuation markups so that you can then go back to your investors, because it's going to be 10 years till you get paid out on an exit. So you got to show your investors paper markups. And if you do that, you can raise your next fund and the next fund and the next fund. And if you don't, then you won't. So it's not that it's like crazy or that they're not smart. They're perfectly brilliant at what they do. It's just not aligned with an early stage entrepreneur.
Yeah. Yep. Hey, let me ask you, these sessions always go way too fast. Yeah. But what, as I mentioned, I've known Ankur for 12 years. I knew his father beforehand, met the whole family at an event. I walked away from the event going, oh my God, what is this family? It's like they all have these crazy ideas. And your father bills himself as a limitless dreamer. And what was it like growing up in a family like that? Because it was very apparent you all had very big ambitions.
All right, so I'll use the last 2 minutes here to tell a story. So my parents...
Well, we also want to hear about the wedding in Egypt, as more people said, is this the guy who had the wedding in Egypt? So
I did get married in April. Someone finally said yes to me, so I'm now married. So look, my parents are immigrants, and it was like I got a first-hand look at what it meant to have the American dream here, right? I mean, my dad grew up in a dirt poor village in India. Like when I say dirt poor, like he literally had to study on dirt floors, right? came to this country with no money, like many other immigrants, and hustled and fought his way through to the point where, like I tell this story sometimes, when he married my mom, they didn't have enough money to go on a honeymoon. And so he was sitting there thinking to himself, how do I pay for a honeymoon? And he had this crazy idea. He said, if I send my resume to 20 companies in cities all around the country that we'd want to go visit, one of them might pay for a ticket to come out for an interview. And so he did. And so he sent his resume, and one startup out of Seattle called Microsoft responded saying, hey, come out for an interview. And long story short, they did their honeymoon in Seattle, and that's how we ended up. I was born in Seattle, right? And so this is like the type of hustle that we forget about, right? It's that how do you get really creative with limited resources to solve problems? And this is another reason why raising too much money too early is dangerous, right? Because no matter how smart you are, you start solving problems with money first, versus how do you get creative with a win-win-win to make things work, right? And honestly, that mentality has stayed with us. Like, it's just been, you know, I like to say my little sister, my little brother should be the ones up here. My little sister started a women's vaginal health company called Evie Bio. She's like the real rock star in the family. My little brother's like on his fire he's doing mortgage servicing. Like, but it's because it's just a mentality, right? And if you see a problem that you get stuck on and you can't stop thinking about it, like that is the company you should start.
This sounds like the real entrepreneurs of Seattle, featuring the Jane
We're now
family.
New Yorkers.
So we'll
We're fake New Yorkers, but we lived there for 7 years.
You're now New Yorkers, all right.
We love New York. We're never leaving.
No, that's great. Well, once again, we are out of time, and thanks so much for joining us. Inspiration to under 30s everywhere.
Thanks for having me.
And it's a great company that you're building, and good luck with continuing that.
Well, thanks for having
There
me.
you go, man. Yeah.
Impact investment through real estate. That's what the Steinbridge Group is doing. We'll break it all down with its CEO, Tawan Davis. Hello, everyone. This is Jabbar Young here at the NASDAQ market site, and I'm proud to be joined by Tawan Davis, the CEO of Steinbridge Group, a privately held real estate investment and asset management company. They made a big announcement with us at Forbes BOK only a few months ago, and we're going to break down another announcement. Thanks for joining me, sir.
Sure,
Happy Black History Month.
Well, thank you.
Yeah,
Same to you.
yeah. So let's start there. Black History Month is easy to say which figure, right, you always remember, and I think we have the notable ones. I'm going to say which black business leader in Black History Month stands out when I say that.
That's a powerful question. I think that Earl Graves is a very impactful person given the time in which he emerged. Earl Graves' business grew in the context where that was unusual for African American business leaders.
Right.
And he was talking about business. He was talking about commercial opportunities. He was talking about market empowerment. And then his business became the defining Black enterprise today remains the defining voice for African Americans in business.
Yeah.
And years after his passing, people still celebrate that Black enterprise as a institution and a media mechanism, and it still continues to thrive today.
Yeah.
And so I think that he stands out for me as an exceptional leader in the business world.
That was great. Absolutely. Listen, Reginald Lewis, right?
Sure,
I mean,
absolutely.
on the cover, it made Forbes cover.
Absolutely.
But the second day of Black History Month, here you are making an announcement, right? A $40 million investment to Virginia Union that is aimed to unlock 100 plus or 100 real estate, acre real estate that they have on Virginia's north side, Richmond. And this is part of a bigger, larger commitment that you made at the Forbes BOK Summit back in November. Thank you for that. $100 million commitment to HBCUs. Let's break down that commitment, the $40 million, which is the first iteration of the $100 million. What's it going to do? What do you anticipate? Break it down for me.
Sure. Well, let me start. Thank you for having me, and it's good to be able to chat with you all again. Let me start talking a little bit about who we are and what we do.
Yeah.
So the Steinbridge Group is an impact investment firm. Our goal is to activate real estate as the first mover of impact.
Yes.
There's been a lot of discussion around what impact investment means and a lot of response, positive and negative, to the idea. Our thought is that impact investment is in fact the most keen way to address what are both economic, social, and governmental opportunities and challenges.
Yeah.
The best business models come from addressing challenges and problems. If you think about today, we don't burn gas, we don't burn oil in order to turn on our to get light.
Yeah.
Right now, electricity solves that problem for us. It is in fact an ESG response. And so our view is that some of the best opportunities to build strong businesses with a market response are in the impact sector. And so those businesses, we believe, also provide outsized returns to investors and opportunities. And so for us, it's not a subsector of business, it's not a subsector of investment. It actually is investment. Investment that has any business strategy that has an impact, we believe, is impact investing. And so our thought, we also believe that there are, that private capital needs to address and solve many of these challenges and opportunities. There is a limit to public and sometimes governmental intervention. And so the opportunity to provide private solutions, market-based solutions to economic, social, and governance issues is the very definition of impact investment, which is why over the next 10 years, people are expecting impact investment to grow to be a $5.2 trillion market. And it's one of the fastest growing subsectors of investing today. And so our firm provides real estate opportunities for impact investors in that way.
Yeah. When you say impact investors, right? I mean, I'm curious about the real estate portion of it. What other sectors, does that fall under?
Yeah, a lot of folks think so. So broadly, impact investment is defined in three categories: environmental, social, and governance. And so if you think of electric cars are really believed to be an impact investing, green energy, environmental. So anything that has a positive impact on the environment, anything that solves social issues. So for example, a lot of our investing is in the residential space. Why? Is because America is chronically underhoused. More than 50% of Americans spend more than 30% of their income on housing. That means that they are housing burden. It used to be that it would take 2 years to buy a home after marriage. Now it takes upwards of 11 years to buy a home after marriage. And so Americans are dramatically impacted, even though interest rates are at highs that we haven't seen in a generation. That we know that over the last year, home prices are up. And so it's making it even harder for people to acquire homes. Basic economics, basic finance would say that the higher the interest rate, the lower the housing prices. But in fact, housing prices are up anywhere from 6 to 8% despite record high interest rates. And so the housing problem is a social issue that we believe can be addressed with a private capital solution. And the last category is governance. So anything that has to do with international affairs, international law, international conflict, business governance also comes into that area. So ESG is synonymous with impact investment, standing for environmental, social, and governance challenges that can be responded to by private investment.
And I would think Steinbridge falls under the social part of that, right?
So much of what we do falls under the S for social impact, and that's where the real estate falls in, and particularly providing attainable housing for working families is where our approach to impact investment emerges. We also are very attentive to the environmental portion. So we focus on opportunities to build in green homes. So we do solar energy, and we try to pay attention to how we source our materials and how we build our communities. And so, our primary focus is probably on the S for the social through real estate, and the second is on the environmental, how we build and deliver those homes.
Yeah, absolutely. Take me back right fast to the Virginia Union. That particular investment is $40 million, and you're going to develop again these areas around that particular HBCU. And I'm assuming building new homes, refurbishing ones that are probably there. If there are there, I haven't seen that area. Is that where this money is going to be going?
That's right. So again, when you think of impact investing, one of the ways to think about it is who do you invest with? Where do you actually put the dollars? There are 100 plus historically black colleges and universities in the United States. And they historically receive 30% less funding than their counterparts. If you put all of their endowments together, they have 1% of the endowments of all of the Ivy Leagues. And so what we're finding is that we thought that there would be an opportunity to direct investment toward these institutions that often are very, very large landowners, but have limited cash and capital resources and opportunities. So partnering with them and to activate their land to economically productive uses. And so this isn't necessarily dorms, this isn't necessarily academic housing or other institutional uses. We're trying to identify ways to bring ancillary and additional income to income streams and to increase and bolster their endowments. So
while making the universities the centerpiece of it.
Exactly.
Right.
So by the way, these universities have been the centerpiece of their communities for generations.
Yeah.
Most of the historically black colleges were started in the antebellum movement immediately after the Civil War, around 1865. And so they were started to respond to 4 million freed folks who now needed to be educated.
Yeah.
And so they were started in that era. Virginia Union University was among the first. In fact, Virginia Union was started as Richmond was being vacated by the Confederacy.
Yeah.
So in 1865, Jefferson Davis vacated Richmond, headed south as the Union Army came in, set Richmond afire on his way out. And while it was burning, Virginia Union University was started to educate future teachers and ministers in the Virginia area. And so we thought it was very appropriate to start with him as a leader in the HBCU movement.
Yeah. And the Steinbridge Group, this is the investment firm, this is a build to rent strategy, right? And this the family rental rehabilitation, you have the urban infill. Break that down for me, the entire strategy, starting with the build to rent, because here we're allowing families, right? And society's so strange because on the one hand, there are people out there who would love to own a house, but then there's a whole new generation out there who may not want to be tied down anymore, right? And so renting is starting to become a little bit more, I think the negativity is kind of driving now. Yes, you want to create wealth and maybe in time you will buy a house, but right now when you're in your 20s and your 30s and you're moving around from one to the other, you're renting and you may not want to be tied down to a mortgage, especially in this interest environment right now. Is that what you're kind of looking at and how you plan on making your profits?
Yeah, so, Virginia Union again is a great example.
Yeah.
They have 100 acres, and we are committing approximately $42 million to activate underutilized assets in that 100-acre ownership. And one of the primary opportunities is to build homes for rent in that area. So if you take all of American renters, somewhere around up to 63% of renters are actually renting a house, not renting an apartment building.
Yeah.
So when we think of renters in the United States, we think of apartments, but in fact, almost 2/3 of renters are actually renting a house, not an apartment building. Second is that if you take all of the investable asset classes in real estate, single family rental is the single largest investable asset class. It's about $4.5 trillion.
Yeah.
Apartments are anywhere from $2 to $3 trillion. And so we cannot address the overburden of rent. We cannot address affordability without having a strategy to address single family and build to rent housing. And so that's kind of where we follow the idea, is that in order to have a meaningful impact on working families that need places to live, that are overburdened with rent, you actually have to deliver not only apartments, but people are now starting their whole families in rental units. And so we have to deliver homes as well.
Yeah, I was in Texas, Dallas, Texas, just last week, and I'm driving around the Plano area because I'm in search of a house too, Tawan, and I'm seeing all I see is lease, lease, lease. And I'm like, where's the buy? I want to buy. And it's lease, lease, lease. And I'm assuming it's because people are locked out, but they still want to maybe get involved with the housing, and maybe that's a way to do it. Take me back a little bit, man. You're from Portland, Oregon. You grew up there. I love Portland. I lived there for a year. I covered the Trailblazers for Comcast Sports. Are you a Blazers fan by default?
You know, it's interesting. My family moved to Oregon in the Great Migration.
Yeah.
So when everyone else went from the South to Detroit to Philadelphia to New York, my family moved from Arkansas, where we were sharecroppers, and we had been slaves in Mississippi, and we moved to Oregon. And they took what I call the L route. So they drove west across Texas, and then up the I-5 corridor to Portland, Oregon, and we've been there since the 1930s. And so I'm a proud Oregon person. People always are. There are black people in Oregon. Well, we were
of course,
Of course there are, tons of them. So,
there's not a lot. There's not a lot,
many,
but you know, and listen, when
right.
I was up there moving around, I had to get used to it, right? And you have to kind of check yourself and understand that, you know, this is just what the demographics are. But I love Portland. I lived in Beaverton. I love my Willamette Falls, Screen Door, Fire on the Mountain Wings. Don't get me going about Portland, Oregon. I loved when I was there and I saw it way differently. But when you were young, at 15, you saw it differently. What did you see?
Well, it's interesting. I didn't meet anyone whose family and grandparents were from Virginia or South Carolina until I went to college. Everyone I grew up with their grandparents were from Arkansas. There's a great book about the Great Migration called The Warmth of Other Suns. And it tells the story of how African Americans moved after the First World War from the south to the north, populating the cities. And there's a great section in the book about Arkansas and how it moved to the northwest and how people moved in large numbers. And so for me, I grew up with some remarkable people. My grandmother, my great-grandmother, probably had an 8th grade education, but when she moved from Arkansas to Oregon, she and her 3 sisters each bought 4 or 5 houses apiece to house the family as they moved north, because there were no extended stay opportunities and their hotels were often unwelcoming. And so they had to house their own families in the migration. And so they basically built the community that we live in today. What is impactful is, in fact, generations later, particularly after the 1968 riots, then you had the drug problem of the 70s and 80s, you had gangs in the 80s and 90s, and the communities began to deteriorate. And so after they built these communities, they unfortunately lived to see them deteriorate over time. And then what began to happen in my lifetime is the very communities that they built and then deteriorated began to gentrify. And so I go home now, and my great-great-grandmother's home is worth about $1.5 million that she bought for $30,000 in the 1940s. And my family and people around us are beginning to be displaced from the communities that they've lived for generations. And so another reason why we are partnering with institutions that are well positioned in these communities is because we're building a bridge to these transitioning neighborhoods so that people aren't necessarily pushed out, so that they're not necessarily displaced, but that they can live and work as these neighborhoods transition and benefit from that change.
Yeah, I know you were seeing a lot at that age, but what did you want to be at age 15? Because you couldn't have said, I want to run a private equity investment firm. What did you want to be at 15?
I tell the story often about when I asked my grandmother when I was about 14 or 15 years old. My family's deeply religious. There is a scripture where the Bible says a cattle on 1,000 hill belongs to God. And I told my grandmother, I just want one hill. Matter of fact, if you give me one cow, I can make a difference. And so for me, I've always had the idea that I wanted to be, do something impactful. I wanted to be in business. I've been asked to run for Congress twice. My father's a minister, my grandfather was a minister. I could have gone that route, but for me, I thought that creating opportunities for people through business would be the way that I would be able to have the most lasting impact. And so I've been pretty focused. I studied economics in undergrad. I went to sociology and economics in grad school, and then went to business school, kind of in preparation to be able to run a business that I could build that was both legitimate as an investor, but could also provide an impact.
So you know, wanted to make an impact. So no fireman, no basketball player, no police officer, none of that. You just knew it was something you wanted to be impactful.
Well, it's interesting. Funny that we are starting with Virginia Union. I was 11 years old, and I remember reading maybe Ebony magazine, or and it was Douglas Wilder was elected the first African-American governor of any state in the United States. He happens to be a Virginia Union alumni. And so in my life, I have just looked up to figures, Douglas Wilder being one of them, that had an impact in ways that were outside of the norm. So I wasn't sure whether it was going to be a fireman. I wasn't sure whether it was going to be a minister, congressman, or businessman, but I was always targeted and trying to model my life after people that I saw that were having an impact in ways that were outside of the norm. And so that's been my focus.
Absolutely. If you had to go back to yourself at business school, what was the best piece of advice that you received in business school?
That everything's going to be okay.
Everything's okay.
Yeah, that everything's going to be okay. I mean, all business, all of our professional careers have their ups and downs. You're going to have some good days and bad days. Some years you're going to do well. Some years you're going to do poorly. You're going to get some good reviews, and you're going to have a boss that you can't stand. You got to stick with it. And you got to focus. And that the number one key to success actually isn't skill, and it isn't even brains. It's actually focus and perseverance.
Absolutely.
And that is so clear to me today. And all of the young people that I deal with, and I've mentored, I was an adjunct professor for some time at NYU, and I tell them all, the number one skill isn't how smart you are. And frankly, it's not even all the time how hard you work. It is focus, and it is perseverance.
Focus and perseverance. We've got about 3-4 minutes left here. I want to get your insight on some macroeconomic stuff, right? Start with the commercial real estate sector. I mean, this is a sector right now showing signs of trouble. The New York Community Bank took some losses on commercial real estate, obviously, with the pandemic now. Post-pandemic, people aren't going back to work as much, so a lot of commercial real estate, people are concerned about that. You got about $1.2 trillion of commercial mortgages that are scheduled to mature this year, according to Goldman Sachs. Barry Sternlicht of of Starwood Capital. He comes out and says, I quote, "The office market is an existential crisis right now. It's a $3 trillion asset class that is probably worth $1.8 trillion now. There's $1.2 trillion of losses spread somewhere, and nobody knows where it is," right? There is prediction that this can cause another economic recession. What do you see?
It's interesting. When I started the company, we actually didn't start in impact investing for real estate.
It's commercial.
We started buying commercial office buildings.
Yeah.
We bought and structured almost $1 billion worth of office building transactions, including the famed Watergate building that got Nixon in trouble. And so we have considerable experience in the office space. These headwinds existed prior to COVID.
Yeah.
Right? There were three trends that we noticed. Number one, people were taking less and less office space, particularly in the major CBD markets, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Boston, New York City. They were taking smaller and smaller footprints. Second, people were working from home more. It was starting with Fridays. It was starting with, maybe a Monday off. But there was a trend of working from home prior to COVID. And third, you have the WeWork phenomenon. WeWork is the most famous example, but these co-working spaces. So what was happening that new businesses and venture-backed firms weren't taking office space.
Yeah.
Those three trends existed prior to COVID. The combination of COVID and very high interest rates and the maturity of the debt is accelerating what was already happening in the office space and what frankly has happened around the world in the office space. And so our sense is that America, like the rest of the world, is going to have to figure out how to repurpose some of its major centers. This is not just challenging for the office owners.
That's right.
This is challenging for
Surrounding
the restaurant
businesses.
owners
Yeah.
and the
Cleaners,
people
all
and the
that.
cleaners.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a major economic.
San Francisco's an example, right? Detroit was gave you something. You don't need to see a bankrupt city, and San Francisco's there, and hopefully they can get it together.
And then if you also think about the tax bases of these cities, often the city's tax bases are driven by commercial real estate activity, which is true for New York City, by the way.
Yeah.
Much of New York City's tax base is in its commercial activity, including commercial real estate, not necessarily in its residential tax collection. And so this is going to be a major challenge, both for municipal funding of schools and of police departments and fire departments, as well as office owners.
Yeah, cities might not be in business, they're not shedding workers, right? And then you got cities that are just empty.
That's right.
Dan Gilbert has all those buildings downtown Detroit, right? And so, very interesting. And housing market, right fast, again, about 143 million homes, I believe you need about 200 million though. What do you do there? Because construction workers aren't building homes. They're too busy building bridges and roads. I know, because it took me a long time to get here, traffic. What do you do when you don't have enough homes being built, but you need them?
Well, this is why, again, economics would tell us that high interest rates should bring down housing prices. The inability to supply new homes because of the cost of inputs, the high cost of labor, and high interest rates is going to continue to skyrocket home prices and home building prices, despite the attempt to manage them through interest rates. And so I think we're facing a real crisis. As you said, 143 housing units in the United States, 84 million single-family homes, and a quarter of those single-family homes are rental units.
Yeah.
So a quarter of America is renting a house, and those prices are going up. And so I think that we just face a real long-term trend with increased housing prices in the United States, which is going to make ownership even more difficult, particularly because of the combination of those increased prices and high interest rates.
Yeah, get you out of here. Two things last. Forbes BLK, obviously you made that 100 million commitment. If you had an audience here who was real estate investors, right, what would you tell them after what we just said? Commercial, housing, is there a play in commercial? What would you tell a real estate investor that could be looking for an opportunity, for you?
I actually think that the challenges of today's real estate market creates the ideal impact investing opportunity.
Yeah.
To provide housing that Americans can afford. It is the crossroads of impact investing opportunity, where working families cannot keep up with the high cost of housing, and the ability for us to deliver that housing to the American people is challenged on multiple levels. And so I think the opportunity to partner with us or someone like us to deliver those homes and at the same time make an outsized return, given the cycle that we're in, I think exists for about a generation. So we're excited.
Absolutely. Last thing here, Good to Great, Jim Collins' great book. I love it. Teaches you how to go from good to great, especially in the business angle. What's the difference between a good real estate investor and a great one?
Good real estate investor and a great real estate investor is partnership, because the idea that we can't do it alone. that you have to partner all along the way from your, you have to partner with your investors, you have to partner with your banks and lenders, and you all have to basically move and row in the same direction. And I think that is the difference. The real estate investors tend to be dramatically egotistical.
Aren't we all?
Dramatically egotistical. I mean, because you build stuff out of the ground, you start thinking about yourself as pretty freaking special. And the reality is that we can't move forward without partnership across the lines, partnering with people and with communities. And I think that's the difference between people who have sustained real estate businesses and people who just ride the cycles.
Absolutely. Here at the NASDAQ market site, Tawana Davis, thank you so much, man, for the time. And thank you for making an impact through the impact investing. Look forward to seeing where the rest of the 100 million goes. I know you got some more announcements coming. And listen, we were just talking Philly off the camera. So you're doing work in Philly, New York, Atlanta, all of that. Look forward to just keeping up with you. I appreciate the time.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.